Okay. Should be live now. Hello, everybody. Hello. How are we doing? Make sure y'all can hear me okay. Because I'd hate it if y'all couldn't, you know? All right. Make sure that we are all in working order. Oh, we got Havoc in tonight. Sweet. Good to have you, Havoc. Good to have you. We're going to get started in just a second. I'm pulling up the first story of the night. As usual, I always start with a short story first, and then I read from the other stories that we have lined up. What's up, Tino? Hello, Tech. Hello, Metoroid, Silverwolf, Swan. I'm glad that Havoc's here. Like, honestly, that's really cool. I know that Havoc and I mostly do the For Honor stuff, but having my friends on to listen to me read my stories is pretty awesome too. Might even get Daniel tonight if we're lucky. And if he does show up, wish him good luck, guys, because I think he's working tonight. And also, guys, I'm gonna be reading a little quietly. That's not because I'm trying the ASMR stuff, but because my brother is asleep in the other room, and I'd rather not disturb him if I can help it. So he is resting. He's had a rough day. Okay, so let's get started. I've already picked out the story I'm going to read for you guys. The first one is a short story. It is called The Beginning of a Beautiful Friendship. It was a request story and a Christmas gift for my brother. I released it Christmas of just last year, so literally last month I released this story. It is a story for my brother's D&D character. I know that sounds weird, but it's what he asked for. 17 viewers and 8 likes. We push it up to 15. Yeah, I know, right, Havoc? I know. Let's get more people in on this. Maybe as I read, we'll grow up, okay? Because usually what I do is I start reading, and then I check to see how things are going in the stream after that. So here we go. The Beginning of a Beautiful Friendship. Written for Lark. The gentle hum of laughter, talking, and chanting carried on the evening air as Joseph walked through the town to the tavern. Known as Dragon's Delights, it was a quaint tavern near the outskirts of town. Joseph came here often before and after big quests or jobs that the guild gave him. He liked to unwind here, to rest his aching body and have a meal. He rarely brought other members of the guild with him, because for one thing, adventurers spend much of their time on the road, but little time appreciating the world they travel through. Most people only see the treasures at the end of the journey, or the foes they've set out to kill, never taking the time to understand the wider world. The Dragon's Delight was a place not meant for such people. This was a tavern for the traveler, the vagabond, and the outcast. Before the guild, Joseph Alvard, the Dragon Slayer, had been such a man. He pushed open the doors and looked around. It was a large establishment, but nothing outside otherwise. Several round tables were scattered about. A few men in cloaks and one in armor sat around, including a few women who had joined them. There were humans, but also elves, dwarves, even a few hobbits. Since non-human races tended to live in the outer city of Dallin, it wasn't uncommon to see them in this place. A few glanced up at Joseph and smiled. Some even waved. The barman, a fat man with a nose that jutted out some, glanced at Joseph and smirked. "Well, if it ain't the old Dragon Slayer himself." "Business good, Roper?" Joseph asked. Roper spit on the ground and narrowed an eye at Joseph. "What you think, you tosspot?" he growled. "Royal Guard hounding me all day, asking about my monthly tax. It's maddening. How's a man supposed to make any honest living?" Joseph smirked at that. "Well, you can't dodge taxes forever, friend," Joseph chastised. "You just watch me, you bugger," he laughed. "Oh, Sherry'll be out in a wee moment." "Sounds good, Roper." Joseph walked on to a private table in the farthest part of the tavern near the balcony. Perhaps the only noteworthy aspect of the tavern was that it had a large balcony that looked out at the fields far beyond the city walls that were the farmlands. Joseph liked to sit near here where he could look out at the stars and the fields and just remember. "Mr. Joseph!" Joseph turned at the small cottony voice to see a small squat creature approach. She was short and green-skinned with long pointed ears and a small button nose. She had short blackish hair that was styled in a bob, and big, dark eyes filled with a warm glitter like coals in the fire. She had a big smile on her face and was wearing a barmaid's uniform with a mug of ale in one hand. She scampered over to Joseph, who turned to smile back at her. "Hello, Sherry," he laughed. "I knew yous was gonna come." Sherry the goblin did cry up. She set the mug of ale on the table and grinned happily. Sherry only came up to Joseph's waist in size, but her personality made her seem twice that big. She was also one of the other reasons Joseph never brought his fellow guild members here. Sherry, like some of the patrons, wasn't well liked by human society. The majority of goblins in Dallin are violent and vicious. Few are as sweet or temperamental as Sherry. Though a child, she developed a little girl's crush on Joseph, which made no attempt to hide, but she was too cute to turn away either. Just for a while. Have you been, Green Bean? Joseph winked.
I'm great, she answered. Roper says he's going to let me try cooking soon.
Oh, well, I know not to come when you're on kitchen duty then, Joseph smirked. Sherry pouted, her ears wiggling, a common sign that she was frustrated.
Just you wait. I'm going to make you the bestest stew ever.
Well, I know you will, kid, Joseph nodded.
And when I grow up, you still going to marry me?
She asked hopefully, a little blush forming on her cheeks. Joseph grinned at the hopeful little thing and ruffled her hair. I'll think about it, Joseph assured her. But what happens if I marry someone before you get big? Sherry frowned a bit and thought it over in her head. Goblins weren't known for their brilliance or wittiness, but a child was even less so. She probably hadn't even considered that possibility.
Well, then I guess you're just going to have to marry both of us,
she said, proud of herself. Joseph snorted and nodded. Yep, guess that's what I'll have to do. And when you're my wife, will you make me your stew every day?
I make you everything, she cried excitedly. I'm going to be a great cook.
Can't wait, kid, Joseph assured her, turning slightly to his table again. Sherry had gasped and tugged Joseph's pant leg.
Mr. Joseph, will you tell me an adventure today? She asked.
An adventure? I told you one last time, Joseph laughed.
But that was, forever ago.
It was a week, Sherry. Joseph had to stop himself from laughing.
Yeah, so you gotta tell a new one, she pleaded.
Joseph smiled at her, but his eyes were glancing away from her at the figure sitting out on the balcony a few tables away. They hadn't moved and hadn't gotten anything to drink, but their hood kept turning in his direction before shifting away. That's been doing that for a while. Hey, Shorty. Who's that? He asked, looking towards the stranger. Sherry looked and shrugged.
Dunno, she answered. She came in and just sat. Said she don't want nothing.
Sherry replied.
Why? She a bad guy?
What do you think? Joseph asked. Sherry frowned and pouted her little lip.
She wasn't very nice. When I came to ask about what she was from, she told me to buzz off. And that wasn't nice.
No, it wasn't, Joseph agreed. Sherry looked up to Joseph as he stood up.
Ooh, is she a villain like in your adventures? She gasped.
I'll go find out, Joseph assured her. Go see if Roper needs anything. Sherry nodded and hurried away to go assist Roper, while Joseph took his ale and walked to the stranger's table. As he got closer, the stranger finally pulled back her hood to reveal who she was. She was lithe and beautiful, with a head of golden hair that fell about to her shoulders like a waterfall. She had pale blue eyes and fair skin. Her body did not boast much in terms of curves, but Joseph knew better than to underestimate the simple beauty of elvish folk. She locked eyes on Joseph as he sat down across from her. You know, he started, Sherry might be a goblin, but she doesn't bite. You don't need to be mean to the kid.
The goblin child is of concern to me, Master Dragon Slayer, she explained. But as she is a friend of yours, I will apologize.
Well, before that, how about a name and why you've been staring at me all night? Joseph requested. The elf woman looked about and sighed.
Elena, she answered. Elena of Thracia.
At this, Joseph raised an eyebrow. Thracia? I've been there. And you don't have the accent or body tattoos, he growled. Which means you weren't born and raised there. In fact, the more I look at you, I don't think you've ever been outside this country. So how about you try that one again, sweetheart?
My mother is a Thracian elf, she snapped, but my father is Lord Albert Wallace.
At this, the pieces fell into place for Joseph. Lord Albert Wallace was a pompous duke who had a liking for two things, power and women. Undoubtedly, Elena's mother had been a servant of Wallace, and after a very passionate night, had been kindly tossed aside by the duke once he learned that she was pregnant.
I want nothing to do with my father, and less to do with his blood. My mother and her legacy is all that matters to me.
All right, I get the point, Joseph answered, sipping his ale before continuing. So I know who you are. Now about the other part. What do you want with me? Elena nodded and reached into her cloak to pull out a long parchment before laying it out on the table. She unrolled the worn fabric to reveal a detailed sketch of a strange crystal. It was in the shape of an egg, and as Joseph stared at it, he saw there was script work written around the image that described a glow that abounded it. The egg of a Lendarian, she said. Joseph snorted at this and went back to his ale. You're either childish or stupid. The egg doesn't exist.
Of course it does, she snapped.
Stupid, then, Joseph growled. The egg of a Lendarian was an old legend told in this realm. It said that when the miracle of creation was happening, the great mountain Olendarin was a location of rest for the Dayanin who toiled away at the creation of the world. It is said that as they rested, their energy and power pooled into a single stone that absorbed all the energy of existence, and, if one could obtain the stone, it would grant them the power of a Dayanin, the power of a god, to rewrite reality itself. There were expeditions made to find it, tunneling jobs, even a war fought over the mountain itself, all for the hope of finding this egg. But none had found it, and none had even seen it. No, not a days. Most just accepted that it wasn't real. "It's real," she snarled. "I know it is. My mother told me all about it. It's in that mountain, and I'm going to find it." "Why would you want it?" Joseph asked. "I can use it to rewrite reality, make my pure blood elf real, not this half-blood filth. Then Thracia will accept me, and I'll finally be rid of this filthy human blood in my veins," she snapped. Joseph stared at her. He set his ale down and then shook his head. "Elena, you can't believe that's possible. The egg can't change your whole family bloodline." "Well, even if it can't, the artifact itself will be enough to win the favor of the elves," she pointed out. "Them and every other nation in the world, but it wouldn't be you they're thankful for or grateful for, but the egg. You'd be nothing but a messenger girl. They'd rip that egg from your hands and then show you the door," Joseph shrugged. "How would you know?" she screamed, rising to her feet. "Because, unlike you, I've been to Thracia, and those pompous knife-ears are about as racist as they come. They're territorial, they're cold, and they're arrogant. They'd notice how your ears aren't really as long as theirs, so they'd call you a half-breed and then walk away from you. The reason I know the egg isn't real is the same reason I know Thracia won't accept you. I've seen the world. I know how it works. Magical eggs that grant wishes and Thracian elves learning to play nice and be humble are all fantastical dreams that even a world like this can't fathom." As he finished speaking, he felt the movement of a small figure approaching. He glanced down to see little Sherry silently trying to reach his empty ale flagon. He smiled at her and handed it to her for her to refill it. Holding it in both hands, she scampered off to refill the flagon, leaving him with Elena again, who was looking very flustered and more than a little angry. "I didn't seek you out wanting you to lecture me," she said. "No, I don't suppose you did," Joseph replied with a shrug. "And yet I can't get your words out of my heart. Is this what you do with all of your clients? Break their heart?" "Just the cute ones," Joseph winked. Elena scoffed and crossed her arms. "Hold your tongue." "I could, but I'd rather hold far lovelier things." Elena flushed deeper, and she beamed an embarrassed red that clashed with her blonde hair. "You're nothing but a filthy flirt," she retorted. After a moment of giggling, she calmed herself before speaking again. "Admittedly, I did want to commission you to aid me in my search for the egg, but if what you say is true, it would be a foolish quest that would waste both of our time and money." "Perhaps, but I'm not averse to more adventures." "With no goal? No quest to complete?" she asked. "Adventuring is rarely just about the completion, but about the discoveries in the journey," Joseph explained. "I think the most important thing you need is to make some of those memories. You're too caught up in this city and who your father is. I think you need to let go of that." "I have no experience. I've never been outside the city. I don't have any knowledge of these things," she pointed out. "Then I believe I can be of assistance, if you'd like. I'll even offer a discount," Joseph winked. "Well, if you insist." She leaned forward and their two faces were nearly touching. "I suppose I can try to trust the great dragon slayer, Joseph." "If you didn't trust me to begin with, why commission me in the first place?" Joseph challenged. "Maybe I like risks," she whispered. "Oh, yes, I'm very dangerous," Joseph breathed as the two drew closer. "No, you're not." Joseph and Elena were both shocked by the little voice that spoke up as Sherry appeared with a full mug of ale, holding it out. "Mr. Joseph is really nice and not mean at all. He's not dangerous." Elena covered her face and turned away, and Joseph groaned. "Ah, great timing, Green Bean." "You going on another adventure?" she asked. "Take Sherry." "No can do, short stuff," Joseph sighed, kneeling down by the little goblin. Sherry pouted and crossed her arms. "You're not ready yet." "You always say that," she squeaked. "When I be ready?" "Now don't be like that," Joseph smirked. "If you come with me, who will make me that delicious stew you're practicing when I get back?" Sherry weighed that thought in her head a little before sighing. "Okay, but you gotta eat 20 bowls of it. 100 bowls," she squealed. "You gotta promise." "Promise." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Now, tell Roper to stop screwing around in the back and clean this place up. It's an absolute travesty." Sherry giggled and hurried away to do as told, and when she was gone, Helena was smiling. "She's sweet. I wish more goblins were like her." "Some are," Joseph shrugged. "She was from a more civilized goblin tribe. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by a less than civilized horde, and she was one of the only survivors." I found her wandering around the outskirts of the city digging for worms. Worms? To eat? That's disgusting, Elena cried. Well, goblins will eat anything if hungry enough, but I'm sure she likes it more here. Elena nodded, glancing from Sherry to Joseph. I do as well, she said with a smile. I think I'd very much like to adventure with you, Dragon Slayer. And I'd like that very much. Shall we begin tomorrow morning? Elena rose to her feet and she started to walk to her room when she paused and glanced back at Joseph. A final question, if I may, she asked. Sure. Your moniker is Dragon Slayer. Is there a story behind that? She asked. Joseph smiled at that. I'll tell you on the journey. I presume it is because you killed a dragon, she asked. No, I killed a fairy who was named Dragon, Joseph retorted. Elena laughed as she walked to her bedroom. Fine, keep your secrets. See you tomorrow, then. She walked off to her room while Joseph turned to his ale, his smile fading as he tried to think of the best lie that he could tell to avoid telling her the truth behind that moniker. Yes, he was a dragon slayer, but there was nothing so noble about it that was worth bragging about. Tomorrow, then, he whispered. And that is the short story for tonight. Hope you guys appreciated it, and I'm sure it gave people plenty of time to get in. So while I get the next story set up, I'll let you guys talk about what you thought. Oh, I got an ad. Hold on. Fix that. Hey, Lark, you good?
Yep, I'm down.
All right. Shoot me a text when you're ready, and I will meet you, okay? All right. Be safe now. All right. All right. Hey, Havoc, we've almost got 15 likes. We're at 14 now, I think. We're so close. Anyway, hope you liked that story. That was my brother's birthday gift. All right. So, right now we are in the middle of reading 3 stories. New Epic, Monster Club, and Everyday Life with Raptors. What would you like me to start with tonight? Oh, and again, guys, if Daniel drops in, please tell him hi, because I don't always check chat while I'm reading. It was cute, especially with the little goblin. Yeah, Lark really liked Sherry when I wrote that. Okay, got a vote for New Epoch, 1 vote for Monster, 1 vote for Raptor. Wow. 1 vote for each. I love it. New Epic, okay. That's another vote for New Epic. Another vote for Raptors. New Epic, Monster. Ooh, finally another vote for Monster Club. I'll tell you what, we'll start with New Epic. Because I can see the folder right here, so let's go ahead and pull that up. All right, we left off on New Epic Chapter 27, as I recall. For those who are unfamiliar, New Epic is a long-running story that I've been doing. It's basically a reverse isekai setup, where the whole world has transformed into a fantasy-style setup. We're following a group of characters, many of whom are based off of different people and their ideas and inspirations. So we're going to pick up where we left off on Chapter 27. There are 31 chapters total, at least for now. I'll probably write more in the future. But I hope you guys enjoy. All right, let's get started. New Epoch Chapter 27, published September 17th, 2020. Man, that was a while ago that I wrote this. As Blemish and Titania had expected, the halflings weren't too keen on letting her anywhere near them. The moment Titania walked out of the forest, there were cries and screams of panic from several halflings who saw her coming, many running for cover and locking their doors. Only Ezekiel remained, though verbally perturbed by Titania's presence. She towered over all of them, most barely taller than her knee, and it was obvious, even without her height, just how intimidating she was. Add to this the fact that her clothes were in tatters and her arms and legs were still soaked with the blood of the minotaur she'd slain, and her appearance must have been nothing short of nightmarish. But the sight of Mariel in her arms gave Ezekiel a last one reason to not run away. She wordlessly sat down. She put down Mariel and Ezekiel, and who began to looking over her, checking her breathing, her heart rate, her forehead. He mumbled a few things that Blemish and Titania couldn't hear, but otherwise said nothing, focusing primarily on diagnosing her issues. Blemish was growing a bit impatient watching him, wondering what he'd say. waiting for an order to be given. "Do you know what it is?" he asked. "No," he grumbled darkly. "Here, carry it to my home so we can get a better look at her." He then paused and flushed. You probably won't fit in my home, miss." Titania's eyes widened and she blushed, realizing he was right.
"Of course. I'll just carry her there and you can take her inside, Blemish."
Titania lifted Mariel up easily and hurried after the little Ezekiel. Blemish stayed close to her, checking Mariel regularly as if it would make some kind of difference in her recovery. The village was small and made up of mostly hills and small huts. Circular doors about 5 feet tall, marked with entrances to homes within the hills. Halfling's eyes could have been peeking out from the windows to watch the giant ogre and the strange masked man as they walked through the town. Ezekiel stopped at a hut at the far end of the worn, grassy street and pushed open the door. Titania handed Mariel over to Blemish, who carefully pulled her inside. Titania sat down outside the hill and sighed, resting her arms and silently gritting her teeth in a distaste at how small the home was. Blemish, meanwhile, wasted no time pulling Mariel to Ezekiel's bed, which had been pulled back to sheets. He lay her down and then stopped to allow Ezekiel to get to work.
"So, when will you know what's wrong?" Blemish asked.
"Give a man some time, son," Ezekiel grumbled darkly. "I've barely seen the girl. I have to give her an examination. She's elvish, right?"
"Yes."
"Any pre-existing medical conditions?"
"I don't know."
"Any recent injuries or accidents?"
"I don't think so."
"Did she eat anything unusual?" "I don't know."
Ezekiel stopped asking questions and looked back at Blemish with a look of disbelief.
"You're traveling with this girl, and you don't know the first thing about her, do you?" he asked.
Blemish flushed visibly and started to get defensive, but stopped himself. He needed Ezekiel in a good mood, and Blemish had plenty of memories of what people did when you snapped at them.
I suppose I don't."
"This is going to be more difficult than I thought," he growled. "There's all manner of poisonous plants and animals in the swamp. She could have come in contact with any of them. Wait outside for a minute with your mother, you said?"
"Yeah."
"Fine, wait outside."
He waved his hand dismissively so that Blemish would leave, and without a word of protest, Blemish took his leave. When Blemish stepped outside to join Titania, he sat down next to her, careful to mimic the way she crossed her legs. Titania noted this and frowned, wondering if he was copying her for some reason, but then dismissed it without really caring all that much.
"So what'd the doctor say?" she asked. "He says he needs time to look her over," Blemish replied. "I wish Aina or Philip were here with us. They might be faster, right?" "Well, Philip isn't a doctor. He can't diagnose anything, just administer medicines. As for Ainor, yeah, he'd help. I mean, he's decent enough sometimes."
Titania growled to herself and crossed her arms over her breast while Blemish glanced at her horn. There was scar tissue around it from where the horn had grown suddenly. Her skin was still a slight tint of red, and he thought back to the savagery she showed in killing the Mots from the swamp.
"You're so much stronger now. You were really amazing," Blemish said.
"I know," Titania answered with a gentle smile. She then let the smile falter and she looked away.
"This never should have happened. I put you and Mariel in danger." "Well, I don't blame you." "She might, though," Titania pointed out. "I'm sure it'll be okay. I mean, if she does blame you, I'll tell her not to," Blemish answered matter-of-factly.
Titania glanced at him in amusement.
"Don't be silly, Blemish. You can't just tell her who she can or can't blame for something."
Titania laughed.
"Why not?"
Blemish asked, smiling curiously.
"She needs to know it's not your fault what happened to us. If she doesn't see it that way, then we need to help her understand."
Titania smiled apologetically and placed a hand on Blemish's head as if ruffling his hair.
"Blemish, Mariel is free to think what she wants about me and that cursed swamp. You don't need to tell her anything about it."
Blemish smiled and leaned close, resting his head against Titania, making her blush deeply and bite her lip in embarrassment. She placed her hand gently on him and pushed him off, causing Blemish to flinch.
"What's wrong, Mom?" "Okay, you know what? We need to talk about that," she gagged. "This whole mom thing. You know that I'm not your mom, right?" Titania pointed out. "Firstly, I've never had any children. Secondly, I wasn't even a girl until the cataclysm happened. I was one of those unlucky few. And thirdly, and most importantly of all, we're not even related. What you said on the execution block? Why'd you even say that? Look, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings or anything, Blemish, but you know that I'm not your mom and I can't replace her, and I really don't want to."
Blemish gazed at Titania for a long moment, his eyes taking her in as he finally reached up and removed his mask with a very careful hand. He laid it in his lap and looked at Titania with a gaze that made her gulp. It wasn't hostile or threatening, it was just pleading.
"When I found the Inquisition," he explained, "they told me my mom and dad were evil and died because God had left them. I never really believed that, but I still had to."
His eyes narrowed as he understood the paradox of his own words and yet found no fault in them either. The nature of truth versus indoctrination becomes clear to him as he spoke. The Inquisition taught me a lot about the world, but they also hurt me a lot. They hurt me all the time. They told me the world would hurt me, that truth would hurt me, that God would hurt me if I didn't do his will. Blemish lifted the mask to his face so he could glare at it, his face showing a shadow of anger. And you never hurt me, though. When I was around you, you never hurt me or said anything mean to me. You taught me things. You saved my life. You reminded me a lot of my own mom. But Blemish, I'm not your... I know you're not! Blemish snapped, feeling a bit frustrated, but maintaining his cool all the same. I'm not stupid. I know you're not my real mom, but I've lost so much now. I lost my real parents a long time ago. And now I've lost the Inquisition. I lost everything. And I gained you. I gained Mariel and Grogner and Philip. But you were the one who let me hug you. The one who saved me when I was dying. You did what a mom's supposed to do, right? So you're like a mom. Titania didn't respond, and she just stared at him. Look, I know it may be weird, but I want to try to start over, so... Can I just be selfish for a moment and ask for you to please give me permission to call you Mom? Sheepishly and yet more direct and pleading, Blemish asked, like he'd never asked before. Titania just groaned and placed her hand on her forehead as if struggling to stop her own migraines from striking, but shook her head and stifled a laugh. You're hopeless, she laughed. But if it really does make you feel better, I guess... Fine, I'll let you... She gasped in surprise as Blemish threw his arms around her middle and hugged her tightly. Titania winced but smiled meekly as she patted his head. Just not around everyone else, okay? Just between us. As Titania glanced up, she saw a small crowd of halflings who had stepped out of their homes, all curious as to why everything was so quiet now and if the ogress had left. What they found was a tall ogress being hugged by a young boy, and the ogress was turning redder in the face than the rest of her body. Damn it, so much for that. As Titania started thinking up an explanation and reason for this, Ezekiel stepped out of his house and turned to the two of them grimly. Upon initial inspection, she has an acute infection. I found a swollen area under her hip that's pretty festered. I've administered some antibiotics that I'd salvaged, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure how bad this infection is yet. I'll need more equipment. Well, we'll get it for you, Titania urged. Ezekiel frowned solemnly. There's a deserted city, destroyed and ruined during the cataclysm. No one lives there now because it's... Well, he looked really unnerved. Something you want to tell us? Titania asked. Well, there's a reason the monsters in the bogs don't come out of there. It's because of what's in that town. What is it? Blemish asked, surprised and curious as what kind of creature could frighten the monsters of the bog. Well, we're not entirely sure ourselves. We just call it the Giant, but that's not what it really is. All we know is that it's not normal, whatever it is. I've seen a lot of strange stuff since the cataclysm, but this thing, it's not natural or cataclysmic. It's like some kind of demon straight from hell. Blemish's blood ran cold. Years under the Inquisition had taught him to dread all things of hell and the unholy. To think he'd actually be facing such an entity was mind-blowing. Titania gulped but still tried to look resolute. Does the town have the supplies we need? The Giant didn't always live there. Before it arrived about a year or two ago, we would go there regularly to take shelter when the bog beasts roamed outside of the tree line, or when we wanted new supplies that we couldn't cultivate. Ezekiel explained simply, as if teaching a school lesson. There are several old and destroyed stores and pharmacies that should have what you need, but, that's if you can, avoid the Giant. Well, whatever it is we need to save Mariel, Titania urged. We can either try to take it on, or we can try and slip under its nose, but whatever the case, we need to get those antibiotics. Well, how are we going to get by when the Giant arrived? Blemish asked curiously. Ezekiel's eyes widened and looked sheepish. Well, that's a long story. A very long story, and we don't have the time right now to go into it. If you're still hanging around at the end of the week, I suppose you'll see for yourself. That's fair enough. Titania stood up, not caring for any more explanations. Keep an eye on Mariel. We'll be back by tomorrow morning. Blemish stood next to her, smiling behind his mask. He was nervous, but also he couldn't be more proud and excited. Sure, they were about to face a hellspawn, but he'd be beside his mother while he went through it. All right, and that was Chapter 27. We can go into Chapter 28 if you would like. Wait, so these guys are based off people? Can I ask who? Well, they're not really based off anyone necessarily. They're just character ideas that me and my friends came up with. Like, for example, Blemish was an idea conceived by my buddy Jay. Titania and... Titania was conceived by me. I came up with her. Ezekiel I came up with. And Michael I came up with. Hannah came up with Mariel. Lark came up with Philip. Anor was someone else. He was a friend on the channel for a while. So a lot of my friends came together and just came up with characters. All right, well, I suppose we can keep going. Ravenette, why did you make the stream such a thankful surprise? I just wanted to do it. Frankly, here's the reality, guys. I'm off work this week. I don't have any shifts at Longhorns. So because of that, I'm making up for that by doing more streams and videos this week so that I can make some more money, because the end of the month is coming up and I need to make as much money on the channel as I possibly can, and streams and videos are the best way to do that. Because every month I try to make $550 off of the channel at least, because that'll cover my rent, and that's already a big expense paid right there. So I'm not quite there yet, so I'm going to keep going until the end of the month and hopefully get there. So I thought that I would do everyone a favor, myself and yourself, and just do some reading. All right, let's do chapter 28. Which one was 28 again? Let me see. Ah, this one. Okay, yeah. All right, this will be a good one to do real quick. All right. New Epoch chapter 28, published September 25th, 2020. It took almost 4 hours to get to the town. There were a few ruined and rusty signs along the grassy way that said it was once called Blufftown. With each step, a strange foreboding swept over both Titania and Blemish. The smell of blood was thick, and there was a faint mist on the air as Titania and Blemish drew close to the ghost town that the halflings had warned about. Blemish stayed close to Titania, and his eyes darted around the scenes before him. The grass around them was matted to the ground as if trampled by hundreds of feet, and the small houses and structures, if they could even be identified as such at all, were piles of rubble and splintered wood, broken bricks, and devastated iron heaps of what Titania assumed to be cars. Blemish was beginning to get an odd feeling in his gut, but tried to ignore it. What the hell could do this? Titania asked. Blemish thought the question over and shook his head. Many of the creatures in the bog might be capable of this destruction, but why would they want to? Perhaps an orc or an ogre horde. If it were orcs or ogres, they wouldn't have left anything to loot. They'd have taken everything, Titania reasoned. Besides, it doesn't explain the giant or whatever it is these halflings are spooked about. The Inquisition never mentioned anything about giants, did they? Not that I know of, Blemish remarked, adjusting his mask to hide his gaze. He trusted Titania, but there were some things the Inquisition had told him he didn't want her to know yet, and he was beginning to fear that one of those secrets was waiting in this town. If he was right, they needed to stay as far away as possible. A cold shiver ran down his spine at the thought, but he stayed silent as he followed. The weight of apprehension weighed on him like heavy cargo. You slowing down, kid? Titania teased. Come on, we're getting closer to the town square, or at least I think it is. Blemish nodded silently and picked up the pace, but his eyes darted about, searching for any sign of danger, enemies, or secrets. Titania shrugged her shoulders as she gazed from one devastating building to the other. The mist around the town shrouded their view of anything beyond about 50 meters, and the dark, overcast sky only added to the blanket of gray which seemed to envelop the entire city. This fog felt unnatural, and it gave Blemish a serious case of the creeps. You should probably split up, Blemish. We'll cover more ground that way. I don't think that's a good idea, Blemish muttered. Titania shot him a look of surprise. Why not? It's just, it's not a good idea, because, I don't know what we're looking for. Well, we're looking for medical stuff, I guess. If you see a place with any, just holler out. If I holler, won't the giant hear me? Blemish winced. The thought of what the giant could be only making him more apprehensive. Come on, we're an ogress and an Inquisition archangel. I'm sure we can handle one dumb giant, Titania smiled encouragingly as she turned to walk across the street to search for items. Blemish stayed near the abandoned structure behind him and carefully walked inside, using the pillars and broken beams to hide himself as he was searching. It was silly, he kept telling himself. There's nothing to worry about, but even as he said this, he knew there might be. The feeling he got from the mist and the devastated town told him several things that made him very uneasy. Very few creatures in this world could frighten the mutants of the bog. There were also only a handful of monsters capable of this destruction on their own. But those monsters couldn't be here. His mind flashed back to the warnings of the Watcher and other High Inquisition agents of the Immortals, the unholy harbingers of Armageddon. They were to be avoided at all costs. They were never to be disturbed for fear that they would leave their homes and travel the world, seeking new lands to conquer and destroy. There were things the Church should not have tampered with in these foul times, and it was this tampering that brought these immortals to life. Stupid. Stay focused, Blemish hissed at himself as he marched forcibly through the destroyed liquor store. He recognized several bottles and snacks that he'd seen in other ghost towns not unlike this one. Coins littered the floor, and scuff marks, both muddy and bloody, marked signs of struggles and fleeing feet, likely during the early days of the Cataclysm when people began falling onto each other. Had this place been destroyed during that purge or later? He walked further into the shop, scanning the shelves for any sign of medicine. He saw something hanging from the wall. It was a banner of sorts that was folded inward. The mist shifted around it like a veil, attempting to hide its dark emblem. But the sight only sent a cold shiver down Blemish's body. As he tried to rationalize, believe it to be nothing, his hand still reached out for it all the same. The shaking hand reached up, moving it so he could see the insignia on the banner. His blood froze as his fingers twitched, horrified. The emblem on the banner was the sign of a golden cross with a great sun in the center of it, with 4 rays of light beaming off of its angles, only slightly shorter than the cross limbs. Surrounding the cross and sun was a long circle with Latin characters inscribed on them that Blemish couldn't read but had knew what they meant. The sight confirmed his worst fears. It was the mark of the Seekers of Holiness. They had been in this town, which meant only one thing. We have to go. We have to get out of here right now. Damn it, Mom! He cried, sprinting from the building as fast as he could. Titania, hearing his cries, poked her head up from the desk drawers she'd been searching, seeing Blemish run towards her at breakneck speed, nearly colliding with her. Blemish! She shouted, catching him before he hit her. What's wrong? We need to go. We need to leave right now. Come on, come on! He tugged on her arm anxiously, pleadingly. He had to get her out of here. They needed to run, and fast, but Titania didn't move. She gave a growl and yanked her hand free. Blemish, stop it. You're being ridiculous. There's a mark. The mark on the walls, he pleaded. I'll explain later, but we can't stay here. This is unholy ground. This place is tainted, and if we don't leave right now, we're going to die. His voice was shrill, rising in pitch as panic was beginning to set in. He struggled to calm himself, but to no avail. Well, we can't leave until we get the antibiotics for Mariel. We'll get them somewhere else. Please, we have to go, Blemish begged, nearly in tears as he tugged once more on Titania, who finally gave him a slap across the cheek, knocking his mask askew. Enough, she shouted. Listen to yourself. You're panicking over nothing and acting like a little brat. I'm not leaving without that medicine, and you are going to calm the hell down and tell me what's got you so scared out of your She never finished her demand, as suddenly there was a tremendous quake as the ground trembled. Blemish fell to his knees. He was going weak. He panicked. He scrambled backwards. Titania spun around to see what caused the tremor. The Titan, Blemish squeaked. For the first time since meeting him, Titania heard true terror in Blemish's voice. Whatever this thing was, Blemish was terrified of it. The Inquisition warned us to never go near their territories. The Seekers of Holiness, it could get out. We need to run. We need to get away or die. Run. We need to run. Titania finally saw something moving, and her own knees began to shake. A massive form began to rise up from the ground, a low growl shaking the air itself. It was almost 4 stories high, towering over some of the buildings. Its body was entirely naked, and it had a large gaping maw that seemed incapable of closing completely, as drool dribbled from the corners of its mouth, and the large tusks in its jaw glistened. A single giant eye rested in the center of its face, and this horrifying eye scanned the air sleepily, as if taking the world in around him. Its rotund belly shook as it began to rise up to its feet, and Blemish was stammering in terror. Titania couldn't help but just stare at the behemoth, her eyes wide and horrified. She'd never seen or heard of anything like this, and now she was starting to understand what had frightened Blemish so much. But how had he known this was here? Before she could think on it, Blemish was starting to hyperventilate, and he was backing away fast. As the monster's head turned in their direction, Titania ran and grabbed Blemish, yanking him through a broken window and inside a restaurant that had long been destroyed. She then ripped off his mask and covered his mouth with her arm, holding tight so his screams and cries couldn't be heard. Shh, she hissed. Don't make a sound. As she whispered this, she suddenly felt Blemish trembling, clutching her tattered clothes with white knuckles as he breathed heavily, trying to bite his lip and stop himself from screaming. Titania had seen this kind of behavior from children afraid to go somewhere like a scary roller coaster or the dentist's office. It dawned on her again that Blemish was still a child at heart and perhaps had his own limits. She slowly wrapped her arms around him and tried to stroke his head, hushing him gently.
It's all right, Blemish. It's all right. I'm here. Just stay quiet. Relax. I won't let it hurt you.
Blemish clung to her for a long time, each tremor of the monster's footsteps causing little squeaks from him that Blemish silenced with another shh from her lips. She held him like that for what felt like an hour, never once letting go, feeling oddly maternal, which only made her face flush. After a few minutes, his shivering died down and the heavy labored breathing began to subside, but the white terror and apprehension was still present on his young face as Titania lifted his head so that she could see each other.
Are you all right?
She asked. Blemish gave a very slow and controlled nod.
Yeah.
He didn't finish, his lip quivering as he tried to control himself. Titania brought her arms around him again, though, as another tremor shook the earth. The beast was near them, searching.
Just stay calm. I'm right here. Mom, please, we need to go, Blemish whimpered. I know, but we can't go without the medicine, Titania resumed. I know you're scared, but we have to get it before we leave.
Blemish slowed his breathing a moment and tried to think.
I think there was a drugstore, a pharmacy. I think I saw it before the Titan showed up, he whispered.
Where? Titania asked. Blemish pointed down the street wordlessly, and Titania cursed under her breath.
Damn, that's a bit of a distance. What do we do? Blemish asked. We're going to have to try for it. But I need your help, all right? Titania asked.
Blemish didn't answer, beating back his own internal screaming wits, which told him to flee with every ounce of his being. Titania reached up and placed a hand on his head, rubbing his ear gently.
I need you to be brave for me, all right? It's only for a little while, and then we'll leave.
Blemish felt a gentle warmth from Titania's hand, and her words ran through his blood as she spoke, and he gave another very controlled and slow nod.
Okay, I'll try,
he repeated in more control.
Attaboy, she whispered. Now follow me.
And that was chapter 28. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Actually, funny story. Jay drew a specific picture for this one. Let me see if I can't find it, actually. One second. I'll share with you guys the image. How about that? Yep, should be seeing it now. I'll make it smaller and put it up there on the screen. There you go. Let me know what you guys think of the image. What story is this? This is New Epic. This is my story, New Epic. Now, do y'all want me to continue and read the next chapter, or do you want to switch over to Monster Club? All right, we got 2 votes for one more. Got to vote for either. Who wrote this? I wrote this, yeah. All right, well, I guess it looks like we're doing one more. Let's read one more. Since we're reading the next chapter, I'll leave this image up so that y'all can see it. All right. But y'all can thank Jay for the awesome art. He did really good. All right, here we go. Chapter 29, written October 30th, 2020. Every step was agony as Titania led Blemish along through the ruined hospital building. Outside, the Cyclops was moving about, searching through windows. The further away his thunderous footsteps, the more calm Blemish seemed, but if they got closer, he would tense up and his hands would shake. Titania occasionally had to hold his hand just to keep him moving. Never in her life had she imagined an Inquisition agent could be so afraid and act so childish. But, at the end of the day, he was a child. The silence was deafening. Titania didn't like it. Blemish wasn't saying anything other than the occasional whimper or yelp when the monster moved. She had to get him on track, to focus.
You know what that thing is? She asked. A Titan, he answered shortly. A monster of the Seekers of Holiness.
Titania paused and glanced back at Blemish in surprise.
The Seekers of Holiness? They made that thing?
The Seekers of Holiness were the third large branch of the church after the Cataclysm. Uninterested in forming a military body or to convert people to God, they were more concerned with seeking answers to why the Cataclysm had happened and if there was a way to fix it. Rumor had it that they had commandeered different towns and territories throughout the world to conduct experiments, tests, and research. They were barely noticeable to the everyday citizen.
Why would the Seekers create that?
Titania asked. Blemish didn't answer, but just bit his lip and covered his ears when the monster let out a low and guttural roar. Tears began to drip from behind his closed eyes. Titania took his arms and tugged him along to the building ruins, still looking, until finally her eyes fell upon a large desk with various cabinets and shelves. She shoved Blemish behind it and began searching through the drawers and shelves for anything that could work.
Come on, just a first aid kit or something, anything. Mom, please, Blemish whispered, we need to go. We need to move on. It'll come back. This would go faster if you help me look. There's got to be something in this building we can use.
Blemish nodded and began scrounging around.
What will antibiotics look like? Just find orange or white bottles with pills in them. We'll let the doc sort out the ones we need, Titania answered.
Blemish, with now something to set his mind on, began crawling around the ruined furniture and shelves to find the pill bottoms. Titania was growing more and more frustrated. She was feeling a weird sense of discomfort wash over her as she felt the monster's footsteps grow closer and closer.
Mom, I think we need to go to the next building. Look, I know you're scared, but... Mom!
Titania looked up just in time to see the monster begin moving to the broken window near the location. Blemish collapsed on his rear, and Titania quickly threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly to prevent him from screaming. Shh, she hissed, trying to keep him silent. The monster's massive eyes scanned over the room. Titania kept low, sheltering Blemish by curling over him and hugging him tightly. Meanwhile, Blemish was hyperventilating, breathing in fast, labored gas, as if the act of drawing air was becoming more difficult. If he panicked, that thing would notice. He had to stay quiet for a little longer. As she stayed in that position, her eyes suddenly fell upon a turned-over desk further down the hallway with boxes splayed everywhere. Within them were dozens of pill bottles. Titania's eyes lit up at the sight, but then she quickly sobered up as the beast let out a grunt, reaching its hand in through the window to feel around. Titania had no weapon to fight it, and Blemish was in no state to fight either. For now, they'd endure it. After what felt like an eternity, though, the monster ceased its search and pulled its hand away, turning and lumbering away stupidly. Titania slowly began to release Blemish, who still clung to her like a child.
It's walking away, she urged. Come on. I see pills right over there. Kid! Blemish!
She shook Blemish, who appeared to be in a state of shock. After a few shakes, he let out a sharp yelp of surprise and looked around.
It's gone.
Keep it together, Titania urged, hustling down the hall and grabbing a large paper bag off the floor to stash the bottles in. Grab it you can, and then we'll go. Finally hearing that they would be leaving this cursed land, Blemish worked with a newfound passion. Scooping up handfuls of the bottles, he stooped to read one and shook his head. Are these antibiotics? He asked. Titania stopped to read one well and sighed, not understanding the long, complicated label. Metronidazole. I guess that might be right. And if it's not, I'll come back alone tomorrow, Titania replied. Blemish winced at the thought. We shouldn't ever come back here, Mom. No, we won't, but I will, Titania answered. Blemish suddenly felt a wave of shame overtake him, and he fell silent. As he finished filling the bag, Titania and Blemish made their escape down the stairs and back out the open street, where the Cyclops was nowhere to be seen. It had finally moved on. Titania didn't take any chances, though, and started sprinting down the sidewalk back to where they'd come from initially, determined to get out of this misty monster city. She never had to stop and check if Blemish was with her. He was at her heels every step of the way. As they made their way down the open fields beyond the city and the fog was clearing away, Blemish said nothing, just walked along with the crestfallen look of shame. Titania frowned meaningfully and then let out a long, labored breath, heaving the pill bag over her shoulder.
So, the Seekers of Holiness make giant monsters? She asked.
Blemish hesitated to answer her, biting his lip. He then slowly shuffled closer to give her his answer. They dabbled in the powers of God, and now they're suffering for it. Well, what does that mean? Titania asked. How did they dabble in God's power? The Seekers believed they could potentially reverse the changes of people, reverse God's design. They took several individuals who had gone through more lengthy mutations or transformations and began experimenting to find ways to change them back, Flemish shuddered, and their heresy invoked God's wrath. Several of the individuals they tested their theories on went through horrifying changes, becoming mindless, soulless, and completely barbaric. Some grew to gigantic height and killed anything and everything before them. We call them the Titans. Titania took in all this with a disgruntled sigh. So why were you so scared to go there? The Inquisitors always taught us that due to the Seekers' heresy and betrayal, the very land that they worked on is tainted by evil. To even go there would invoke the wrath of God and the destruction of the Titan. When it showed up, So you thought you were on unholy ground and we were going to get killed because of it, Titania replied smoothly. Well, we got out, so I guess those Inquisition guys were wrong. I'm really sorry, Mom, Flemish mumbled meekly, causing Titania to stop walking and turn to look at him. She set down the bag of drugs and then dropped to a knee, placing her hands on Blemish's shoulders. Blemish, I'm not mad at you. I was scared too, so I know how you felt. I didn't yell at you or snap at you because I was angry. I did it because I was trying to keep you safe and get us both out of that town as quickly as possible. But we all have things we're scared of. Blemish listened, and though his face softened, the frown did not fade away. Mom, please don't go back alone, he begged. I hope I don't have to, he answered, continuing their walk home. However, as they moved on towards the halfling village, new questions started rolling around in their head. This Titan, the Seekers of Holiness, created it. That meant they'd once been here. Where were they now? Did the Titan kill all of them, or were they able to escape? Is the Titan the reason the mutants in the bog won't leave the safety of its foliage? If so, why did the halflings feel safe? Did it never venture beyond its territory? And finally, without other civilizations near them, the halflings would surely starve or be taken over. The Titan was the deterrent for most enemies, but that didn't mean they were necessarily safe. Who else had an interest in the halflings? Where did they get their goods? Surely they weren't all crazy enough to sneak into Titan territory for groceries every few days. I think there's something the halflings aren't telling us, Titania growled. They're hiding something. Too many things aren't making sense. Like what? Flemish asked. Where are they really getting their goods? There's no way those halflings run to that town over there every few days or weeks for groceries to keep themselves alive. They're trading with someone. But there are so few towns nearby. Who are they in cahoots with? Flemish shrugged her shoulders. The dwarves, he answered. Dwarves? Titania asked. The dwarves from the southern kingdom of Caloran, Flemish answered. According to what I've learned from the Inquisition, Caloran is wanting to use this land as a staging ground for war. And that was chapter 29. That just leaves 2 chapters left that I've written. Let me know what you guys think. I'll go ahead and remove the image here. So, would y'all like me to move on to Monster Club now? Am I going to write more soon? I'll try to. It's going to depend on how busy my work schedule is. All right, moving on to Monster Club. Sounds good. Let me pull that up. Monster Club, Monster Club, Monster Club. There you are. All right. Where did we leave off? Ah, Chapter 8. We left off on Chapter 8 after Michelle's transformation. This is the least popular of the 3 stories we've been reading, but I still love this story. It's the one that turned into a video game after all, so I gotta love it. Anyway, Chapter 8. This was written February 17th, 2013. Gosh, I forget how old this story is. What a long time ago. Anyway, let's get started. Monster Club, Chapter 8. Oh, hold on. Need a drink real quick before I read. You'd be surprised how quickly your throat gets dry when you're reading. All right. Yeah, Spirit. There's a Monster Club visual novel, which is basically a kind of a game. Like if you've ever heard of dating simulators, those are visual novels. They're basically sort of video games where you read a story, but with visual aid and all that, and music in the background and all that kind of stuff. It's not like a super interactive game. It's more of a story that you can play. But it was made a couple years ago by a friend of mine. Maybe I'll show you the website later. But anyway, let's continue.
Abraham, wake up.
Abraham heard the voice, but refused to open his eyes. He groaned and rolled over in bed, trying to ignore the sound coming from the foot of his bed. "Leave me alone," Abraham groaned in response. There was a pause, and then the slightest sound of movement. Suddenly there was a squeaking and a creaking sound as the weight suddenly hit the bed. Unwilling to open his eyes, but becoming more and more concerned, Abraham turned his head away and rolled over onto his back.
Wake up, you silly Willie.
Abraham cracked his eyes open. The sound of that voice, it was not familiar. It sounded like a little girl, but what was a little girl doing in his room? He opened his eyes and looked to see the other side of the bed, kneeling on the mattress next to him. There was indeed a little girl. She was wearing a blood-red sundress, and her little body was smooth and clean. She had black hair that fell down to the bottom of her neck, and her eyes were a familiar dark red. She was smiling at him with a sweet little girl's grin, and Abraham had to blink multiple times to make sure he was seeing this right. Who are you?" Abraham asked. He blinked and opened his eyes to look at the girl again. The girl was staring at him, but her face had changed to a frown. She was glaring at him, and her red eyes were almost glowing. Was she another monster? "Stop being such a lazy ass and get up," she snapped. Abraham bolted out of bed and stared in stunned amazement. Only moments ago, her voice had been that of a sweet and childish little girl, but now it had turned to a male and adult character. The girl crawled off the bed and walked towards the door, and the door opened to reveal Tamil and Sarah, who were both bent over in fits of laughter. Tamil was leaning against the wall, trying hard to hold in his laughing, and Sarah wasn't even trying to hold back, and she was laughing hysterically. Abraham was thoroughly confused.
"We're sorry, Abraham. We couldn't resist."
"Sorry," Sarah laughed. "Well, what are you talking about? Who's the girl?" The question only made Tamil and Sarah laugh louder. The girl gave Abraham a cold look, and suddenly her eyes glowed red. Her body began to morph and reshape into shadows and masses of black energy. Her body grew and shifted until she didn't look young and sweet anymore. When the shadow cleared, standing in her place was a full-grown and tired-looking Asher. He smirked and turned to face Tamil. "All right, I did it. Pay up," he chuckled. Tamil high-fived Asher's hand before pulling out a small wad of cash.
"It was perfect, Asher,"
Tamil gasped through tears of laughter. Abraham couldn't help but stare with shock and a lack of understanding. Asher took the money from Tamil and glanced at Abraham. "Well, it really is time to get up, though. Breakfast is waiting." Asher then walked off into the hallway. Abraham pointed and stared stupidly as Sarah and Tamil continued to howl with laughter.
"We should go," Sarah chuckled. "It really is time to get back to work."
She scurried off, giggling the whole way, leaving Tamil and Abraham together, as Tamil was still laughing into his bandaged hands. "You gotta tell me what happened," Abraham asked. Tamil smiled and patted Abraham's shoulder. "Asher has power to shapeshift," Tamil explained. "Can look like anything or anyone. Thought it'd be fun if Asher woke you up as Ashley." "Ashley?" "Yes," Tamil laughed. "That name for the little girl Asher turned into." "Does he do that often?" "No, does not like that form. We had to talk him into it." Tamil laughed again, and Abraham started to calm down and blush a little in embarrassment. "That wasn't funny," Abraham growled. "It was," Tamil crackled. "Really, it was." Abraham walked around him and made his way into the hallway. Suddenly he slowed down as he came by Michelle's room. No sound could be heard from inside, which caused a little lump of concern in his stomach. Tamil stopped laughing and rushed to join him. Is she... Abraham wanted to ask. "Best not to worry," Tamil said warmly. "Michelle tired, but leave her alone." Abraham nodded and joined Tamil as they both walked downstairs. Sarah and Calypso were busy setting the table as Asher was sitting on the couch rubbing his shoulder. The same shoulder that had been injured when Michelle had thrown him into a tree. But how could that be hurt? Hadn't he regenerated?
It'll be a few moments before breakfast is on the table, Calypso said to him as he came downstairs. Why don't you wait with Asher?
Abraham nodded and went to go sit with Asher as Tamil came to join them. Asher scooted over so that Abraham could sit down, and he turned and smiled at his Asher and looked at his shoulder. How's your shoulder? Abraham asked. It healed, Asher said calmly. It regenerated from last night. Then why are you rubbing it like that? Abraham asked. Asher gave him an odd look and shrugged. Well, as a vampire, I can regenerate any wound or injury almost automatically, but, I still feel the pain of the injury when it's inflicted, Asher explained. I guess I'm just getting over that. Abraham nodded, and then Asher placed his hand on Abraham's shoulder. Hey, listen to me, Abraham, he said darkly. Don't mention anything about last night to Michelle. Why not? Abraham asked.
Does not need the reminder, Tamil said sadly, his eyes downcast, despite the fact that he couldn't see anyway.
Tamil's right, Asher said with a voice as firm as his grip. Michelle has never gotten out of control like that before, and I don't want her to dwell on that. She has no memory about what she did as a wolf, and we don't want her to worry about whatever she got loose. Abraham cocked his head to the side.
You mean she really doesn't remember anything?
Asher shook his head. The werewolf curse activates a feral part of the brain. When the transformations take place, her mind slips into this primal and instinctive state, and it cuts off all logical thought and memory. She isn't aware of what she does, or what she's doing, or even who she is, but the strangest part of it is that the wolf will act on her subconscious.
I don't understand, Abraham said. It means that even if I'm in wolf form, the wolf will connect with my perceived conceptions and act on them. If I perceive a threat in my human form, then the wolf in me will also see it as a threat, and do what it can to remove it.
The whole room turned around to look at the stairs where Michelle was standing. Her face was tired and her hair was messy. She looked thin and weak, like she hadn't eaten or slept in days. Asher rose to his feet as well as Tamil. Michelle took a few hesitant steps downstairs and walked to the den.
Asher, thank you for last night, Michelle said.
There's no need to thank me, Michelle. Asher said, I was helping a friend. Michelle smiled.
Either way, thank you. I'm sorry if I hurt you.
Asher shook his head. Hey, Michelle, why don't you get something to eat? Michelle shook her head and walked past Asher and stood in front of Abraham.
Before I do, I need a word with you, she said.
Abraham nodded hesitantly and rose to his feet. He followed her out of the den as she led him to the front hall where no one could see him. She stopped and turned to face Abraham, and there was a look of dead seriousness on her face.
Did I hurt anyone last night? She demanded.
Abraham opened his mouth to answer, but he remembered Asher's order not to mention last night. So he quickly tried to think up a lie. His hesitance was a dead giveaway to Michelle, though.
Look, I know that I lost control, okay? I saw the damaged room. I saw the claw marks. I also saw the broken chain. All I want to know is how much damage did I do? Did anyone get hurt?
No one, Abraham said, happy that he didn't have to lie. You didn't hurt anyone. Michelle gave him a cold look as if searching his soul for the truth. Her cold, husky blue eyes bore into his.
And Asher, she demanded, how did he get me under control again? How far did he push himself?
Abraham wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know what...
Please, Abraham?
Michelle walked forward and placed her hands on Abraham's shoulders, and they were shaking.
I have to know how bad it got.
Abraham locked eyes with hers, and he knew that he couldn't lie. Solomon said he used, a blood rage or something? As he said this, Michelle moaned and let go of his shoulders.
Damn it, she muttered. Then it got that bad, huh?
Abraham gritted his teeth angrily, knowing that he had to do something. He had to help her. It's okay, really, Abraham said. No one was hurt and everything turned out okay. Michelle shook her head.
Not for Asher, she said. My guess is he's rubbing his old wounds this morning.
Abraham stopped and nodded. Michelle growled and looked away.
That blood rage is a state that Asher enters when he's under a lot of stress, anger, or exhaustion.
Yeah, Solomon told me that it was like what a human has an adrenaline rush.
He's right, but what happens after the adrenaline rush passes?
Michelle countered. Abraham's grin faded and he stared at her.
When your adrenaline rush passes, your body goes into recovery mode. You're sluggish, you're heavy, you're weak, and it's the same with a vampire. His body is recovering. He's weakened. His regeneration powers are slower. He's exhausted. He overworked himself to keep me under control. This is my fault. Michelle walked to the wall and leaned against it. I'm dangerous. Asher shouldn't have to go through that every full moon. None of you should. But Michelle, he does it for you, Abraham pointed out. I know he does, Michelle snapped. He does it to keep me under control. He does it to keep me pacified. No, I think he does it because, I don't know, I guess he wants to protect you in the club. I mean, he doesn't do it because he hates you or because he thinks you're a monster. I think he goes that far so that you don't hurt yourself or anyone else, but so that you can be safe. I mean, look, if he really thought you were a monster, then he'd just kill you, wouldn't he? I mean, who would put themselves through all that every month for someone that they didn't care about? Michelle turned her head and glanced at Abraham sadly. You know, you're a pretty good guy, Abraham. Thanks. She stood up and walked past him, patting his shoulder with her hand in a show of gratitude. As she walked past, Asher came to the door. Michelle paused and took a moment to hug Asher around the middle before walking past him into the den. Asher watched her go and then shrugged, turning back to Abraham. I don't know what you said to her, kid, but thanks. I think you cheered her up. Abraham nodded and then frowned as she watched Asher make his way to the staircase. Well, where are you going? Abraham asked. Bed, Asher said. I'm exhausted. Abraham watched him move slowly up the stairs and couldn't help but notice there was a pained expression on Asher's face. Michelle had been right. He was still recovering from using that shadow power of his. Asher had so much power, but all of it led back to being a vampire. What was it like being a vampire? Are they really that powerful? Asher, I have a question to ask. Asher stopped and turned to look at Abraham. Well, ask. Abraham paused and thought how best to phrase his thoughts without sounding offensive or stupid. What's it like to... Asher stared at him for a moment, and Abraham suddenly felt like he needed to change the question. Without even thinking, he quickly readdressed his question. What's it like to fall in love with someone? Abraham felt the need to slap himself across the face as he asked the question. Asher gave Abraham a nervous look and cocked an eyebrow. Abraham, he said, you do realize that I don't stay in that girl form, right? That was a joke Tamil and Sarah wanted to play. I guarantee I am in no way interested. Abraham blushed and shook his head. No, that's not what I meant. He turned his head and growled. I've just seen the way that you look at Calypso and, hush! Asher hissed fiercely. His eyes were horrified and they were darting towards the kitchen where the others were, hoping that they hadn't heard. I don't know how you figured out about that, but you can't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone about that. Abraham nodded his head quickly. You got it, promise. Asher sighed and turned to make his way back up the stairs. And he paused for a moment and then turned to glance at Abraham. And to answer your question, it makes me feel alive again. He then stalked off to his room. As he did, Sarah's head poked around the corner to see Abraham. She waved and gave a big smile. Hey, come on, it's time for breakfast. What are you doing over here? Abraham groaned and followed Sarah into the kitchen where the rest of the table was already eating. Solomon was sitting at the head of the table, as usual, and he turned to see Abraham come in and he smiled. Ah, good to see you, son, he laughed. Sleep well last night? Abraham sat down at the table and pulled a cut of bacon over to his plate. Yeah, I slept fine. Solomon smiled and leaned close. Today's just going to be a simple day. The club's going to clean up the house and the yard area, and you can help out or you can just relax. Abraham shrugged and looked around the table. Sarah and Tamil were talking more than they were eating. Calypso was carefully eating into what looked like fish sticks. Michelle wasn't eating much at all, but she did look much more awake than before, and a tad more happy. As he watched the meat, a thought came to his mind. Where do you even get food from? Abraham asked. How do you afford it? That's a good question, Solomon said with a chuckle. Well, normally we get money from Sarah, who sells her clothes and designs, and of course I have a small little treasury waiting away in the bank that I sometimes pull from, or rather, I get Michelle and Calypso to pull from it. They usually go shopping for food and withdraw from the bank, but now that you're here, you can probably help them with some of that yourself. Abraham nodded. Sure, anything I can do to help. Abraham finished eating his food and looked around at the group as they continued eating. I'm going to step out for a moment. He stood up and walked back to the front hall. He opened the front door and sat, revealing a beautiful front lawn. He sat down on the steps and looked around at the lush green grass and the trees before him. The house just seemed a bit stranger every moment. After last night, he didn't know what to think anymore. What else what is he going to see and learn? There was just so much to take in. Suddenly, there was a rustling of bushes and trees that caught Abraham's ears.
He looked up to the woods and saw a strange creature moving and crawling its way through the bushes. Abraham climbed to his feet and stared at it. He felt an urge to call the others, but he couldn't look away from the bushes as the creature crawled out. His breath caught in his throat. It was a long and strange creature. Its upper torso looked like that of a young woman with long and dirty hair. Her skin was slightly tan, but it was covered in cuts and bruises. Blood coated her small and delicate hands. Her head hung low, not allowing Abraham to see her face. She looked like a poor, lost creature, but the strangest part was what was below her waist. From her waist down, her body was a long, scaly snake tail. Her scales were caked with mud and clay and blood. She looked so weak, and her hands clawed desperately at the ground, trying to pull herself across the front yard and away from the woods. It was like her snake tail simply would not work. Abraham took a cautious step towards the injured creature. "Are you all right?" he asked. The girl turned her head upwards, and her sad and empty eyes looked up at him with a look of absolute desperation and fear.
Help. Help me?
Her head suddenly fell and collapsed on the grass. Abraham jumped back and turned to the door.
Help! Someone come quick!
Within moments, Sarah and Michelle were at the door with Tamil and Calypso closely behind them. When they saw the creature on the lawn, their reactions were devastating. Sarah gasped in horror and turned away to bury her face in Tamil's bandages. Tamil, who couldn't see what had caused such horror, only patted her head and looked ahead blankly. Michelle suddenly went weak-kneed and had to grasp the door in order to hold herself up. Calypso ran past all of them and dropped down next to the snake creature. She placed her hands over her and began touching on her wounds, inspecting her and looking her over.
Get Asher! Quickly, I need his help!
She screamed. Michelle, coming to her senses, turned and ran inside, sprinting up the stairs to Asher's room. Abraham dropped down next to Calypso. She grabbed Abraham's hand and pressed it against one of the larger cuts.
Keep pressure on that. We need to stop the bleeding. Once Asher gets here, we'll get her inside.
Abraham couldn't help but notice the deep seriousness and firmness that Calypso was displaying. Within seconds, Asher was at the door. He looked over the scene and rushed outside. He gave out a cry of pain as the sun beat down on his skin, causing a burning smell to fill Abraham's nose. After Asher ignored it and wrapped his arms around the snake girl and lifted her up as easily as if she were a sack of feathers. "Grab her tail, Abraham!" Asher barked. Abraham wrapped his arms around her tail and lifted it up, following Asher inside. As they walked in, Abraham could smell Asher's burning skin, but nothing looked badly burned. Asher ran into the kitchen. "Clear a space!" Sarah and Tamil were already at work throwing plates and silverware off the table. Solomon was just watching them all, a terrified look of shock on his face. "What on earth?" Asher placed the girl on the table and stepped back, collapsing on the ground. He was breathing heavily, and his skin looked tanner than before, as if he'd been sunbathing. Calypso ran to the table and began fussing over this creature. She was naked, and Abraham felt the urge to turn away, but he couldn't look away from her, and how much attention the house was giving her. Calypso placed her hands on the creature's body and began healing her injuries and rubbing water on it. She barked orders at Tamil and Michelle, who ran to do their jobs. Sarah was leaning against a wall, unable to look at the image before her. "What's going on?" Abraham cried out. Solomon stepped forward next to Abraham. "Abraham, I believe that introductions are in order." He placed one cold, ghostly hand on Abraham's shoulder and held out his other one, indicating the snake girl. "Abraham, meet Katie." And that was Chapter 8. So now y'all know. Let me know what you guys think while I check something real quick. All right. So, should we read the next chapter, or should I move on to Raptors now? Vlad's already asking for Raptors, huh? I know this isn't my most popular one here. Actually, what was the Discord? Let me check that. The Discord vote was... Oh, that's scathing. 12 voted for New Epoch, 7 for Raptors, only 2 for Monster Club. That's scathing. All right, well, it seems a couple of y'all want me to read the next chapter. All right, all right. All right. Chapter 9. Oh, yeah, this is a long one. I wrote this February 18th, 2013. This one's a bit of a doozy. All right, here we go. By the way, did Hannah, Aaron, Havoc, or Daniel join while I was reading? I know that Havoc popped in at the beginning. Don't know if he's still there. And I thought that Aaron popped in. I couldn't be sure. Every now and then I'll check chat just to see what's going on. So I thought that I saw Aaron. I haven't seen Hannah, and I haven't seen Daniel. Alright, so no Daniel, no Hannah. Oh, that's a shame. Saw Aaron once. Okay. Alright, no big deal. I do this for fun. If they have things they need to do, I understand. Alright. Let's get to it then. Chapter 9. "This is Katie?" Abraham cried. He looked at the long snake girl laying on the table. Her eyes were closed and Calypso was leaning over her, bandaging her wounds and rubbing them with some kind of ointment. He had heard so much about Katie from the others, but he hadn't expected this. He shouldn't have been surprised, though. After all, he had known she was a monster like the rest of the house. Asher pulled himself to his feet and nodded. "Yeah, it's her," he groaned. Michelle spun around to see him, and she noticed that his skin was tanned and burned in some places from being exposed to the sun. She ran forward and held him up, making sure that he didn't fall over. "Asher, you've been through enough. Go upstairs and sleep. We'll handle things from here." "No, it's fine. I need..." "Please, Asher," Calypso said, turning to glance at him. "Don't overwork yourself. You're already weak from last night. Please, just rest." Asher gazed at her, and his eyes seemed to glint. "All right. I will." He turned and hobbled up the stairs to his room. Abraham watched him go and then gave Solomon a worried look. Solomon didn't look away from Katie, but he seemed to notice Abraham's concern. "Asher will be fine. Once the sun goes down, he'll be back to his old self again. Right now, I'm more concerned about Katie." Abraham nodded and took a hesitant step forward to get a better look at her. She had long, dark hair which was mangled and dirty. Her body was tan, and she had an almost oriental look about her. Perhaps she was from India. Her long snake tail was bloody and bruised, but you could still make out its gorgeous emerald green scales. He looked up her body and saw that she was, again, naked, and he blushed, but he found he couldn't look away from her. "What exactly is she?" Abraham asked. "She's a Lamia," Solomon explained. "Much like Sarah's a half-human and half-spider, Katie is half-human and half-serpent. She's the youngest one of us. We were so worried that we had lost her forever." Sarah, who was still refusing to look at the unconscious Katie, suddenly let out a sob and tore herself away from the room, scurrying up the stairs quickly. Abraham watched her run and looked at Solomon, puzzled. Solomon shook his head sadly. "Pardon, Sarah. She and Katie were very close. They're practically sisters. Seeing Katie like this is extremely hard for her." Calypso and Michelle moved rapidly around the table, cleaning Katie's injuries and taking care of her. Tamil was leaning against the wall. His pale eyes were locked on the farthest one away. Though he couldn't see what was happening, he could feel it, and it was plain to see that he was just as anxious as everyone else. It was 2 hours before Calypso and Michelle finally finished patching up Katie. Calypso sat down and Michelle dabbed her forehead with a wet towel, like a nurse would do to a surgeon in the middle of the operation. Calypso breathed slowly, and the room was eerily silent. Solomon walked to the table and looked down at Katie sadly. If he could have cried, he would have. "How is she, Calypso?" Solomon asked. "She's exhausted," Calypso answered. "She's suffering minor lacerations, and she has a small concussion.
Judging from the blood on her hands and fingers, she's suffering trauma to her lower body and was forced to crawl most of her way here. I've patched her up the best I could, but all she can do now is rest.
Abraham was stunned by her professional attitude. This was the same ditzy mermaid who stumbled and tripped over herself when walking around? The same girl that blushed when Asher's name was mentioned? And here she was talking like a highly trained MD.
Will she be okay? Michelle asked. Calypso smiled. I think she'll be just fine, Calypso said softly.
Tamil breathed out a long sigh of relief, and the color came back to Michelle's face. Solomon leaned back and beamed. Thank God, he cried. Our lost lamb has returned. Abraham watched the room brighten. There was a gasp of joy, and Abraham turned to see that Sarah had come back downstairs. Seeing that Katie was okay, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around Katie's body, hugging it tightly and sobbing. Tamil finally stood up and gave a small nod. She needs rest. We should take Katie to bed. Everyone gave a nod of agreement. Michelle and Sarah both stopped forward and stood on either side of Katie.
Asher's sleeping. We'll take her, Sarah said.
Sarah placed her hands under Katie's shoulders and lifted up her upper body, while Michelle lifted the lower snake body. The two carried her together through the den and up the stairs.
We'll take her to her room. You don't mind, do you, Abraham?
Abraham shook his head, remembering that his current room was originally Katie's. No, not at all. Take her there. It's fine. Sarah smiled and led Michelle up the stairs, carrying Katie's body carefully. Solomon and Tamil followed after them. Abraham even found himself tailing the group. He glanced back at Calypso, who was still sitting. She motioned for him to go.
I'll be fine. I need some fresh air.
Abraham turned away to the group and followed them to Katie's room. Hours passed, and the evening was already coming upon them. It felt like the day had gone so fast. The entire house, with the exception of the sleeping Asher and the tired Calypso, were all sitting in Katie's room, watching her, praying for her to wake up. Abraham watched the group as well. Sarah stood next to Katie's bed, stroking her hair and watching her through her big red eyes. Solomon stood by the door, keeping a close eye on everyone. Michelle sat with Tamil, breathing quietly as Tamil placed his arm around her shoulder. Abraham could see the amount of emotion flowing through the group. Suddenly, they saw movement. Katie's eyes opened to reveal golden eyes. Her pupils were slits like snakes, making her appear exotic, but strangely beautiful. She moaned a little, causing a ripple of response through the whole room.
Katie! Sarah cried. Are you okay?
Katie looked up at Sarah and blinked a little, not sure what to make of her.
Sarah?
She moaned. Sarah burst into tears and wrapped her arms around Katie again in a tight hug.
Oh, God, I missed you. I missed you so much, little sis.
Katie slowly and painfully wrapped her arms around Sarah's middle and hugged her back, small tears rolling down her cheek.
I missed you, too.
She looked up at Michelle and Tamil and beamed.
Michelle. Tammy.
Abraham let out a small chuckle when she called Tamil Tammy, but Tamil didn't seem to mind as he practically glowed at the sound of her voice.
Hey, Katie, Michelle said kindly. We've all been so worried about you.
Katie glanced at Solomon and suddenly frowned. I didn't mean to scare you. Solomon jiggled.
You didn't scare me. Did I scare you?
No, not at all. It wasn't your fault, dear, Solomon answered firmly. Katie grinned as more tears joined the trickling streams rolling down her face. But suddenly her eyes fell on Abraham.
Who is that?
She hissed. Sarah frowned and held Katie close.
His name is Abraham. He's new, she whispered. He's a human, Katie snapped.
Solomon moved forward and pulled Abraham to his feet. He's not an enemy, Katie. He's one of us. Katie didn't look convinced. She turned away and buried her face in Sarah's shoulder again. Solomon pulled Abraham outside the room. What's going on? Does Katie not like me or something? Abraham asked. Did I do something wrong? Solomon shook his head. Oh, it's not you, Abraham. Just try to be patient with her. He looked back towards the room and sighed. Katie has a prejudice towards humans, especially men. Abraham stared at him for a moment. Why? Solomon sighed and looked to the side as if looking for a way out of the conversation. That's a long story, and I don't think I'm the right person to tell it, Solomon muttered. Just give her some time. She'll get used to you. What do I have to do to win her trust? Abraham asked. I really don't want any enemies around here. Well, Solomon trailed off and looked out to the distance. His eyes suddenly became anxious and concerned. Abraham saw him tense up, and from behind him, Michelle came running to Solomon. You sensed it too, didn't you? She growled. Solomon nodded. How did they find us? Solomon snarled. Abraham stared at them both in confusion. What are you talking about? Michelle didn't hear him, as she and Solomon began discussing earnestly what needed to be done.
We have to hide. We'll lock ourselves in the basement, Michelle offered.
Not an option, Solomon responded. We'll just be trapping ourselves, making it easy targets. We need to get Asher. He's the only one who can handle them.
But he's exhausted. He won't stand a chance.
When the sun goes down, he'll be good as new, Solomon said hopefully.
But the sun only just started to set,
Michelle barked. That we need to stall for time. We've got to do everything we can to buy time until the sun goes down, Solomon answered.
I only smell 2 of them. I'll handle them, Michelle offered.
Solomon shook his head. You're just as exhausted as Asher. You won't last either, Solomon spat. Go get Sarah. We've got to keep the house safe.
Michelle turned and ran from the room. Solomon spun to face Abraham.
Abraham, I know this is confusing right now, but I need you to listen very carefully. The Dawnbringers have found us, and they've sent professional hunters to wipe us out.
What? Abraham cried. Well, what do we do?
Solomon raised a hand to silence him.
The only chance we have is Asher, but he's still worn out. We need to stall long enough for the sun to set and give Asher the chance to regain some of his strength.
Well, okay. What do you have in mind? Abraham asked. I'll help.
Solomon smiled sadly. I know. And honestly, you're our best shot. You're human. They won't kill you unless they know that you're one of our own. We need you to go out there and meet the enemy. Try to buy us time. Lie to them. Tell them that we kidnapped you, that we'll offer you as a trade. Tell them whatever you want, but you have to give us time.
Abraham felt a chill run down his spine, and he quickly shook it off, knowing that he had no other choice.
All right, I'll do it, Abraham said. If anything happens, don't panic. I'll bail you out if anything gets ugly.
Abraham nodded and ran downstairs to the front door. As he opened the door, he couldn't see anything strange at first. The sun was setting in the distance, giving off a bright orange glow to the world as shadows snaked across the ground. The evening breeze caught the tall grass and caused it to ripple slightly. It was a lovely evening, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until he saw 2 figures appear down the dirt road, walking side by side towards the house. One was shorter than the other, and both had on trench coats. One wore sunglasses and had a buzz-cut hair. The other was a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. They walked swiftly and with purpose. They were the hunters, the ones who had kidnapped Katie and had caused the whole house to worry. Abraham felt his resolve strengthen, and he ran out to meet them. When they saw Abraham, they stopped and stared at him. "Hey!" Abraham shouted. "Over here!" The 2 glanced at each other and marched towards him. "What are you doing here?" the man asked. Abraham quickly began to think up a lie, working his hardest to make up a story that they might believe. "There were monsters in that house!" Abraham cried. The man nodded. "That's why we're here. We're going to rid the house of them." They started to walk around him down the front lawn, but Abraham ran in front of them again. But there aren't any more!" Abraham shouted. This caused the 2 to pause. "Then where did they go?" "After they heard you coming, they packed up and left," Abraham said quickly, his eyes darting to the setting sun. It still wasn't down yet. He needed more time. "How do you know this?" the woman asked. "I saw them leave. They took off in that direction," Abraham shouted, pointing down the road. The man shot Abraham a glance that, even with his sunglasses on, looked cold and menacing. "I don't believe you," he growled. Abraham felt cold sweat building up on his forehead. "We interrogated the Lamia, and she told us about the inhabitants here. They'd sooner die than abandon this place. And besides, even if they did, the ghost known as Solomon cannot leave this house. His soul is bound to it." Abraham opened his mouth to tell another lie, but the man shoved Abraham to the side. "Don't worry, boy. You have merely been brainwashed by these demons. We shall not punish you. Just stay out of our way and let us do our job." Abraham watched as they walked past him to the front yard. He spun to see that the sun, though lower, was still not gone. "Wait, please!" Abraham shouted. "Enough!" the woman answered. "Stay where you are and keep silent." Abraham felt a great feeling of anger and guilt fill him. He'd failed, and there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, the woman was lifted off of her feet by an invisible force, which launched her into the air and onto the grass. The man spun to meet it, but he too was knocked to the side by the force. Abraham watched in awe as Solomon suddenly appeared before his eyes. He was glaring furiously at the 2 hunters.
"You will not touch anyone in my house!"
The male hunter climbed to his feet and chuckled. "Ah, the ghost Solomon. You really think that we didn't come prepared for you?" Solomon lunged forward to strike the hunter again, but the female hunter had moved as well. She slipped on a glove and reached out, and to Abraham's horror, the gloved hand grabbed Solomon's arm and threw him away. Solomon landed in the grass and stared in shock. The woman laughed. "Ha! This glove is soaked in your ectoplasm. It can touch ghosts and even hurt them." Suddenly from the front door, both Sarah and Michelle appeared, with Calypso right behind them. The hunters turned to look and both smiled. "Ah, how nice. We don't have to waste time looking for you. We can finish you all right here." The male hunter laughed.
How did you find us? Michelle snarled. Keep your leash on, werewolf, the hunter barked. We simply followed the Lamia here. We allowed her to escape so that she could lead us right to you. She had no idea that we'd been tailing her. He then reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 silver stakes. The woman next to him pulled a pistol and aimed at Calypso and Sarah. Now enough talking. It's time to take out the garbage in this place. I quite agree. There was the sound of a gunshot and an explosion of brains and blood as the female hunter went flying backwards, an enormous bullet wound through her head. The male hunter spun to look at her dead body and then turned back to see what had shot at her. Standing on the roof was a figure that was about as tall as the hunter, but he was shrouded by the leather jacket and hoodie covering his face. In one hand he had a pistol which was still trained on the hunter. His other hand was tucked in his jean pocket. Even from under his hood, Abraham could see Asher's glowing red eyes. But Abraham looked at the sun, and to his horror, it still wasn't fully down. If only Asher had waited a few more minutes. So you're the vampire of this little group? The hunter snapped. The Lamia kept telling us how badly you would kick our asses when we found us. And at first that caused us some concern. But seeing how you can't walk out in the sun without covering yourself like that, you're no longer the hunter, but the hunted. Now you shall be the first to taste the sweet embrace of death. I really wish you'd shut up, Asher snapped. I'm dog-tired and not interested in this. He fired the gun again, but this time the male hunter rushed backwards. Asher dropped from the roof and landed in the grass. The hunter pulled the stakes again and bowed. Remember my name for the last few moments of your pathetic life, creature. Warren Matthews, the hunter said loudly. This is the name of the hunter that finally defeated the so-called Monster Club. With that, he lunged forward and swung the stake at Asher. Asher leapt away from the stake and spun, trying to aim his gun at Warren. He fired, but the shot missed, as Warren was already circling around Asher to deliver an attack from behind. Asher turned to meet it, but Warren, without warning, stopped in mid-swing and threw something into Asher's face. It looked like some kind of yellow powder, but it must have been good for Asher, because suddenly he dropped, grabbing his face, and screamed. He dropped his gun and cupped his hands to his face. Warren just laughed. I know your weaknesses, vampire. You're kind of fiercely allergic to garlic. So we were sure to coat our weapons in garlic, as well as carry along some handy little tricks. Garlic powder, for instance. Asher didn't answer, but only tried to rub the powder out of his face. Abraham tried to warn Asher as Warren moved forward with the silver, garlic drenching his stake. Asher! It was too late. Warren buried his stake into Asher's stomach. Asher screamed in pain and fell backwards, his hood falling off of his head, exposing it to the setting sun. His face began to burn, and Abraham could only watch in horror as his face turned from tan to red to white. Asher tried to stand, but Warren already was on top of him. He pulled a knife and held it to Asher's throat. Rest in peace, you bloodsucker. The world was plunged into darkness as the sun finally vanished beyond the horizon, and Warren swung the knife. Abraham screamed as Asher's head fell to the ground, leaving a pool of blood behind it. The bloody stump of Asher's neck still pumped blood as his corpse hit the grass with a thud. Abraham shook his head in disgust and in agony as he saw Asher lay motionless. The rest of the house had fallen silent, clearly in shock. Warren stepped back and wiped the blood from his knife. Now that I've taken care of that, now I'll deal with your lot. He leaned down and picked up his fallen stake and walked towards Michelle, who was standing between him and the rest of the club. Any final words, werewolf? He demanded. To Abraham's eternal surprise and shock, Michelle smiled at him. She was giggling. Actually, yes, I do, she growled. And what's that? Warren asked, raising his stake. Michelle just glanced at him with a look so venomous that Abraham felt the need to step back himself. You talk too much, she laughed. Warren gave her a puzzled look. The sun set before you delivered that killing blow, you idiot. Why don't you take another look at that vampire you just decapitated? Warren as well as Abraham both spun to look at the fallen Asher. The blood on the ground was flowing back into Asher's body. Warren turned fully around and watched with amazement as Asher's body suddenly stood itself up, with its head reforming onto his neck. He looked as good as new, if not better. His eyes were glowing blood red and his fangs were bared furiously. How in God's name did you... Warren demanded, but Asher didn't give him the chance to finish the question. With a snarl, he darted forward with blinding speed and struck Warren across the face. Warren responded by shoving the stake into Asher's chest, but before it ever made contact, Asher's body exploded into a swarm of shrieking, angry bats, screaming and striking and biting at Warren until he was forced to drop the stake and start flinging his arms like a drunken ape, trying to fend off the biting bats.
Soon, Warren had to drop to his knees and cover his face to block their attacks. As he did, the bats flew into each other, reforming Asher's body. Asher roared and yanked the hunter to his feet. "You hurt Katie," Asher snarled furiously. "Let go of me, you monster!" Warren shouted. "You struck Solomon and Abraham. Go to hell! And then you threatened my family," Asher finished. "I should shoot you through your goddamn heart and be done with you." Warren Matthews just smirked and shook his head. "Go ahead! Do it!" Asher stared at him for a moment. His eyes then turned to Solomon, who had gotten up and was standing by the others. He had a questioning gaze. Abraham looked up to Solomon, and he gave a slow and solemn nod. Asher growled and faced Warren again. "Abraham, go inside, now," Solomon hissed. Abraham didn't move. His eyes were locked on Asher and Warren. Asher grabbed Warren's coat and ripped it from his body. "Go on, you freak! Shoot me!" Warren shouted. Asher's eyes suddenly glowed bright red. He leaned close to Warren's face, gripping his shoulder, with one hand and his chin with the other, exposing the hunter's neck. "Normally I would, but after a fight like that..." His eyes flashed and showed his fangs, causing Warren's smirk to quickly change to his terrified expression. "I'm hungry," Asher whispered. Asher reared back his head like a snake and opened his mouth, exposing long and razor-sharp fangs. With one swift and devastating motion, he brought his fangs down on Warren's neck. There was a sound of a crack as Warren's neck broke under the force of the bite, and an explosion of red blood flew from Warren's neck. Asher's jaws stayed locked on the neck, drinking in the blood. Warren's eyes widened in pain and in horror, his face slowly beginning to turn pale. Abraham couldn't look away. "Let's go inside now," Solomon urged. He took Abraham's hand and led him to the house, away from Asher and Warren. The rest of the house had all different reactions to the sight before them. Michelle looked on sadly but firmly, slightly sickened. Sarah was covering her ears and shutting her eyes tight, trying to shut out the image and the sounds. Calypso had turned away, and there were tears in her eyes as she was struggling to keep a straight face. And at long last, Warren's body sank to the ground dead, his pale face still twisted in terror and agony. Asher turned to face the house, blood all over his mouth and chin. He reached up and wiped it away, and then he saw the looks on everyone's faces. He looked down darkly and walked onward. "Sorry," he muttered. He then moved past him and inside. "I'm going to go check on Katie." Sarah and Michelle turned to follow him. Solomon and Calypso stayed at the door with Abraham. Thank you, Abraham, for buying us time. If you hadn't helped us, Asher would have been killed. There's no way that Asher could have recovered from that decapitation if the sun hadn't set when it had." "It's nothing," Abraham said, still in a daze, but it's never easy watching a vampire feed," Solomon explained. "It's hard on Asher, too," Calypso added, her face filled with tears. Abraham wondered what she meant by this, but she was already walking back into the house. Solomon stood with Abraham and smiled. "I know that it may not seem like it, Abraham, but we won a victory today. We got Katie back, and we saved the house from sure destruction." "And them?" Abraham asked, indicating the two dead bodies. Solomon shook his head. "Sometimes, Abraham, sometimes we have to do things that we're not proud of for the sake of the ones we love. But just because someone does something for the right reasons doesn't mean that they're not damned for it." Abraham turned and smiled at Solomon, and Solomon put his hand on Abraham's shoulder and walked into the den, feeling peace wash over him at last. And that was chapter 9, I believe, yes. Believe it or not, when I first started writing the story, Mika, the girl who I was writing it with, drew an image for that, but I'm pretty sure it'd be too graphic to show on YouTube, so I won't. But what I will do is I will show you, well, actually, now that I think about it, probably isn't too bad. I can show you. All right, let me pull it up. I haven't. Yeah, looking at it now, it's not that bad. Okay, I'll share the image with you. I'll share the image real quick. And don't mind the sounds you hear. There are children outside. There are a lot of kids that live in my apartment building. All right, y'all should be able to see it now. But yeah, Asher went full Alucard there. The Alucard was a bit of an inspiration, as was just the original Dracula. So, like, I try. One of the things that I wanted to do with Monster Club was I didn't want to just degrade the monsters that I was creating. I wanted them to be very much like their original counterparts. Like, I didn't just want to make I didn't want to make Asher just this sparkling guy who just drinks blood. I wanted to give him all the powers and weaknesses of vampires. But yep, that was the image that Mika originally drew. There have been a lot of artists over the years that have drawn pictures of Monster Club characters. But I'll remove that one now. If y'all want to see more Monster Club images, I can share a few real quick from different artists. Let's see. That was Mika's art right there, but I can show you other folks' art. Let me see. Let's go up a little bit. I know I've got them here. Ah, here they are. Hannah, of course, drew her own art for the characters. Back when Mika quit working on the story with me, I lost a lot of inspiration and drive. So Hannah came along and helped, and she redesigned all the characters, literally. Like, it was really nice of her to do. And this is an example of one of the redesigns that she did. This is Asher's redesign. I'll put it up on the screen. You should be able to see it now. And then I will show you the art from my other friend, the one who drew the video game art. I'll show you that one real fast. Let's see. Let me see. I know it's somewhere here. It's a big file. It's a big, big folder. Here we are. There we go. The visual novel sketches. Let me show you Sarah. Because her design was always the most unique. At least to me, anyway. Oh, my fault. I put it in the wrong spot. There we go. That fixed it. Okay. And that was Sarah's image. Y'all should be able to see it. Would fire be effective against Asher? Not really. He is weak to sunlight, garlic, wooden stakes, but he's not weak to the cross, and they explained why in the earlier chapters. But that is Sarah's image. You can thank Hannah Valdiabella for that one. That is the image for Sarah from the Monster Club video game, believe it or not. All right, well, with all that out of the way, let's move on. So, do you want to hear some more Monster Club, or do you want to move on to Raptors now? It's your call. I have two friends named Hannah. The one who drew the first round of redesigns was Hannah Hiring, but the second one is Hannah Valdiabella. All right, we got one vote for Raptor. Another vote for Raptor. I guess that means we're doing Raptors. All right, we'll save Monster Club for next time.
where did we leave off? All right. If y'all remember what happened last time, the girls were in a bit of a pickle. The Raptor girls had been sent to this island where supposedly there was this illegal extra species smuggling thing going on, and they were supposed to put it down. But when they got there, they discovered there were no extra species persons. It was a gun smuggling operation, and they had just been discovered. And they couldn't get in touch with Owen to help get them out. So here we go. Everyday Life with Raptors, Part 7, written December 5th, 2018. What are you talking about? Owen snapped. They stood in the airport control room. He was with two other men. One, a very overweight Hispanic man named Jorge, who was leading this operation. He had a thick black beard and a red beret on his head. He had a cigar in his hand, and he looked positively flustered on his corpulent face. Jorge didn't speak English, so next to him was a translator named Paul, who spoke both languages fluently. He was a thin man with a meek constitution. Unlike Jorge, Paul was shakeable, easily startled. He had nearly pissed himself when he saw the girl step off the plane earlier, but now it was Owen who was frightening him. You mean we have no contact? Jorge spoke rapidly in Spanish, and Owen turned to Paul. He said that he can't explain, that there must be some sort of interference, likely coming from the smuggler's hideout. Paul answered in a stutter. Owen cursed and rubbed his brow. Shit! And I can't get word out to them. How heavily armed are the monsters at the smuggler's den? Paul re-spoke the question to Jorge, who blinked a few times and tapped his cigar. Monstro? ¿Qué? This time it was Owen who looked confused. What? He doesn't know what you... I know what he said, Owen snarled. I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about. Jorge turned to Paul and spoke carefully and matter-of-factly. Paul nodded. He says there are no monsters on this island, just gun smugglers. What? Owen shouted, causing Jorge and Paul to jump. You mean this isn't a monster immigration hideout? No, Paul cried. Then why were we called? My squad only deals with extra species situations. Owen turned, grabbing his backpack and running for the door, waiting on Jorge to respond. He says that we received a call from your superiors saying they were going to deal with this situation on the island. We didn't even know about the smuggler's den until we got the call, so we trusted your navy to provide. Owen spat and threw open the door. He looked out and saw two motorcycles waiting nearby. He turned back to the shaken Paul and Jorge. I need this bike. But you don't argue with me, Owen shouted. Right now, on the other side of this island, there are 4 girls with predatory instincts in the middle of ground zero, and I can't communicate with them. They are trained, but they are definitely not domesticated. If they feel threatened, they will resort to their instincts. And God help us if they lose themselves to it. There were 24 men in the jungle, all of them gangsters, thugs, and some were even former military. They were all ruthless and desperate. They knew they'd seen something moving in the trees. They'd heard the planes and helicopters flying overhead recently, and they'd assumed that the American or Cuban government might be onto them by now. It was a good gig they had going, and none of them wanted it ruined. They'd kill anyone in that jungle, but right now they didn't see anything. No soldiers, no spies, not even a bird chirping. Hey, got something, one called out. 3 broke off to investigate, and they knelt down. There on the log was a few drops of blood. They'd hit something. Something was in the jungle with them. But who? Hey, you hear that? One spun around, gun on his shoulder and aiming next to the trees. Hear what? Didn't you hear it? No. Ah! Silvio! The men spun around at the sound of Silvio's scream, but just as it was heard, it was gone again. Matthew had his pistol drawn, when suddenly he let out a cry of fright as a massive fort hit him full on and threw him to the ground. The men shrieked and ran to back him up, but each time one had his back turned, another let out a scream, one after another until only 18 remained. If the men were nervous now, they were beginning to panic. Whatever was in that jungle, it was systematically taking them down one after another, and no one had fired a shot. Ricky raised a light machine gun up, and then he saw it. A flash of blue ran through the bushes. He fired fast, screaming furiously as he swore. Did it have a tail? He fired at it harder, but the figure was already gone, slinking back into the foliage. Come out! Come out here, you... Ah! One of the bushes to his left, a green figure screeched and threw itself on him, dragging her vicious claws into his chest and ripping it out, biting down on his throat until the screaming stopped. Delta spat out the blood and snarled, rushing back into the woods to continue the hunt. I found one! I found it! It's some lizard! God, get it off me! Jeffrey never finished alerting the men to Charlie's location. Echo had silenced him with a knife buried deep in his neck.
One of the men, an older bloke named Russell, came running out with a submachine gun. He saw Charlie and started shooting. She moved like a snake, sliding in and out of the shot, until with a primer roar she headbutted him into a tree and began savagely cutting him down with her combat blade. Within 7 minutes, the 24 trained and anxious soldiers were reduced to just 8. As one saw his comrade fall, he would chase the attacker, only to be attacked from behind by another. This was their way of hunting. It was primal. It was instinctive, and it was merciless. With cruel and deadly efficiency, the soldiers were hunted, slaughtered, and silenced. All the while, the girls knew they could not communicate through words, so they communicated in the way of raptors, through screeches and roars, and thus the sounds of wild animals filled the night, as screeching, hisses, roars, and growls could be distinctly heard, a language known only to them, but foreign and horrifying to their prey. There were only 5 now, 5 to kill, 5 in their way. Blue let out a hiss that alerted Delta and Echo to engage. The man had no idea what hit him. Echo attacked from the left, throwing him to the ground. The second man who saw Echo's assault was so busy aiming his gun that Delta was nothing but a shadow as she dealt the fool his final blow, a sword through the back of his heart. Charlie had broken off from the group and was circling around to seek out the stragglers and the ones running for cover. It was better this way. With her injured shoulder, she could take them down more effectively. Blue was issuing orders and striking where necessary. But just as she was about to draw back, one final soldier in the tree line was making a break for the main road. Blue pursued, her snarl evident on her face as she lunged towards him. She leapt through the air, bursting from the ferns to tackle the bastard. Owen flew through the jungle on his bike, hearing the familiar sound of gunfire and screaming, and a frightening sound of raptor calls. His fears were realized. He brought the bike to a halt as he saw the body of a gun smuggler on the ground, his body mangled and slashed by a blade and a claw. As he stepped back to appreciate the efficiency of this kill, there came a man bursting out onto the road. Behind him flew the beautiful Blue. With uncanny viciousness, she fell upon the smuggler and drew her combat sword she had strapped to her back in a holster. Her eyes flashed dangerously and her fangs were bared. "Blue!" Owen roared. Blue's eyes darted up at him and they stared, taking him in. "Stand down right now!" "Alpha!" Blue squeaked, the predatory glare gone from her eyes. "I ordered you to stand down! Get off him!" Blue swiftly put her sword away and jumped off the man who scrambled to his feet. As he got up, Owen threw his arm out and with an angry grunt clotheslined the runner as he hit his back hard. He didn't even acknowledge him. His eyes were fixed on Blue. "Get the girls here. Right now!" Owen hissed. Blue nodded quickly and let out a raptor-like bark from her throat. Within moments, the other 3 came running out of the trees. Their eyes fell on Owen and they started to growl until they recognized him. And then they also saw the anger in his face. Instantly, their moods and their expressions softened into guilty glances away from his accusatory eyes. Even Delta frowned and looked away from him, cleaning blood from her chin. "What happened?" Owen ordered. "Tell me what the hell happened!" We were outnumbered and attacked," Blue answered weakly. "We surveyed the situation and discovered we were dealing with human hostiles. We did try to contact you, but," Echo whimpered. "But we couldn't reach you," Delta finished. "And Charlie got hit." Charlie pointed to her bleeding and broken shoulder with a painful squeak. "Why didn't you retreat? Why didn't you return to the command center?" Owen ordered. Because, Blue tried to rationalize. "Well, we had a job to do," Delta argued. "We were sent in to deal with a threat, and it was dealt with, right?" "No!" Owen barked. "Human targets are prohibited, you know that!" "But our lives were in danger. They attacked Charlie!" Delta exclaimed, though the look in her eyes seemed more directed at herself. She was making excuses for herself more than Owen. "Delta, Echo, take Charlie back to the command center and let them know we're leaving immediately after Charlie gets patched up." I'm okay, Alpha. I did not ask for your input, Charlie," Owen hissed. "That's an order. Just go." "Yes, sir." Delta and Charlie saluted and took off down the road, Charlie sniveling and holding her wounded shoulder. Echo looked briefly at Owen in an apologetic way and ran off, leaving Owen and Blue alone. "Blue, what the hell were you?" "Alpha, there's no excuse for our actions, but please listen to me," she begged. "Fine. Talk." "Sir, we were scared. Charlie was wounded. We couldn't get in contact with you, and with all the confusion, I had to make a split-second decision," she explained. "I'm not saying it was the right call, but I felt we had no other choice." "It was against protocol." "It was to protect my family," Blue countered. "With all due respect, Alpha, I did what I thought you would have done in my situation." Owen looked at her and down, and then he let out a curse. shoving his hands into his pockets and walking over to a tree to lean against it, his hands trembling violently as he fought back angry tears. God damn it. Alpha, I can't tell you how sorry I am, Blue muttered. Neither can I, Owen answered. I don't know which is worse, Blue. The fact that you deliberately broke protocol and now will be punished for it, or the fact that you're right and I probably would have done the exact same thing you did. Blue looked up at Owen in stunned disbelief, flabbergasted at his admission. You would have done the same thing? Blue, you made a judgment call for the safety and preservation of your family. I can't blame you for that. It's what any respectable soldier would do. Then why are you angry with us? I'm angry because of what this means now. Look, whether you made this right decision or not is irrelevant. You killed humans. And now there will be discipline from my superiors for me and for you. Blue looked away and bit her lip, a nervous habit of hers. Owen rubbed the back of his head in frustration. I'm angry because I don't want to lose you, and I might now, Owen admitted. If the judicial board determines you broke the law, it could be grounds to end my contract with you, and this whole experiment will end. We'll be separated, and you'll be going back to that island. No, Blue cried. Alpha, we'll do anything. We can't go back. We have to stay with you. You've made us a family. Even Delta admits you're a good Alpha. We need you. We need to stay with you, please. I'll do what I can, Blue, but for now, we need to just get back to the mainland. I don't know how to fix this yet. You're dismissed. Regroup with the others and prepare to leave. Blue walked around Owen and paused, reaching out her claw-like hand to touch Owen's shoulder. Alpha, please forgive me. I already have, he answered, closing his eyes and grimly touching her hand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, Blue. You and Delta, Charlie, and Echo. I am proud of you. I just don't know how to fix this mess we're in. Blue felt hot tears stream from her golden eyes. The same eyes that had flashed with bloodlust to slaughter 24 armed soldiers now wept bitter tears of regret for just one. I'll see you at the plane, Blue whispered, turning and running into the night, fighting the urge to burst into sobs. Meanwhile, Owen walked into the jungle to inspect the damage his girls had done. Though he knew it made no difference as to their circumstances, he could not dislodge the morbid curiosity he had for the girls' hunting efficiency. As he looked among the bodies of the soldiers on the ground, the mangled and mutilated corpses, the savagery ripped apart and cut up, he remembered a very sobering truth that perhaps he should have realized and kept in mind long ago. They were girls, yes. Soldiers, definitely. But they were still primal predators. And that was part 7. Do y'all wish for me to go into part 8 now, or do you want to stop there for tonight? All right, we'll go one more. I see a couple people asking for one more, so we will go one more. All right, Everyday Life with Raptors, Part 8, written April 23rd, 2019. Owen hadn't worn his dress blues in a long time. He'd been wearing casual clothes for so long he'd forgotten how they automatically made him feel stronger and more masculine. In all honesty, he needed that right now. The courthouse was the last place he wanted to be. He would have called in to talk with his JAG attorney for his next steps. The attorney's name was John Hammond. He was an older fellow, but a very cheerful man, short, pudgy, and with a white beard on his face. He walked with a cane due to a limp in his left leg. In many people's opinions, he should have retired long ago, but he loved his work too much for that. Owen had known him for a few years, and seeing him often brought a smile to his face. As he walked towards him, Hammond held out a hand with a big smile on his face. "Ah, good to see you, Mr. Grady. Always a pleasure," he said with a thick Scottish accent. "Morning, Mr. Hammond. Sorry we're seeing each other again under such circumstances," Owen said. "I'm sure you've heard about what happened." Yes, quite the pickle we're in, I'd say," Hammond nodded. "Let's go to my office and talk. I think we have a chance to get through this." "Really? It'll require some doing, but I do believe it'll be possible," he answered, hobbling off to his office not far away. "Your leg okay?" Owen asked, noticing the limp. "Hip replacement. Don't worry, it's hardly a concern," Hammond chuckled. "We've got bigger problems to contend with." They made it to a large mahogany door, and Hammond shoved it open. Owen followed close behind and closed the door to the office behind him. The inside had a library of books to the right and left, a few knickknacks to the side, and a few miniature dinosaur sculptures, including a T-Rex. Hammond took a seat behind his desk and sighed, satisfied to be off his legs. You like dinosaur, Mr. Hammond?
I'm in love with the human imagination, he smiled, and dinosaurs have always aroused and challenged the imagination. What a treat it would be to actually see them today, wouldn't it? To touch one, see them in real life instead of as dead fossils. But I suppose the closest we'll get, though, are those girls of yours, yes?
All the more reason to protect them, Owen said.
Absolutely, and we'll spare no expense in doing so. Firstly, let's go over the incident in question. I need you to walk me through it.
I wasn't there for when the girls actually attacked, but I got a call from Hoskins saying he had a job. He indicated extra species smuggling on the island, and my girls would take care of it. When we arrived, the girls were briefed, armed, and then sent out on a mission. Our comms were then jammed, and the girls were fired on by the gun smugglers. With one wounded and having no way out, they fought to defend themselves and fell back on predatory instinct. They stood down as soon as I arrived on scene, though. Hammond was taking notes as he spoke.
The girls all assumed it was an extra species situation, then?
Yes, we had no reason to think otherwise.
Not we, Hammond corrected. Did the girls all assume?
I mean, yeah, they did.
And did the girls make the decision for themselves? You had no say in the matter.
Yes, they acted without my permission, Owen retorted.
Who made the decision?
Blue. As Beta, she's in second in command and was required to make tactical decisions in the field.
And yet you're still the alpha, Hammond asked.
Correct, Owen answered.
Hammond nodded. Do the girls always do what you two say, or do they make decisions on their own? Are they defiant?
Delta can be defiant, but she'll always obey orders in the field, Owen explained. And Charlie's a little immature and doesn't always listen, but she knows better than to talk back or resist orders. Hammond frowned and leaned over his notes.
I should tell you now, this isn't going to be easy to do what we have, he explained.
They acted in self-defense. They were protecting themselves, Owen argued,
and I agree with you. But we also have to keep in mind these girls aren't human and are hardly recognized as United States citizens. They are assets to the Navy, not soldiers, Hammond explained. If the court views the girls as property of the Navy, like weapons, then you'll be held liable for gross negligence. As the girls were under your care and control, they are your property, and you will lose your commission on the girls, and they'll be returned to Hoskins.
Are you serious? The girls aren't just assets. They're thinking and feeling creatures.
By your own admission, Mr. Grady, they never define order and will always obey it. That's what a weapon does.
But they're like any soldier would do. Soldiers follow orders.
Not just like any soldier, Hammond corrected. They are not soldiers. They are dinosaur extra species girls. The Navy does not readily recognize them as humans or soldiers. Thus, their cognizance is in question.
You've got to be kidding me. They're just guns to these people? The Navy sees them as tools?
I agree it's not fair, Hammond smiled apologetically. I'm simply explaining how the courts will come at you. And I think we can combat this, but to do it we need to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these girls are cognizant and sentient beings. Let me explain. If we see the girls only as guns or weapons to be used, then you're the one irresponsible for their actions, and thus the girls would be returned to Hoskins. You'd be removed of them. But if we see the girls as soldiers, as thinking and feeling creatures, then it was in their own self-defense that they acted, and it would be their responsibility. But if it's under their responsibility, then self-defense falls into play here, and they'd be just fine. We need to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they are cognizant, sentient creatures.
Okay, I understand. So, how do we prove that? Owen asked.
Well, you can't prove anything, with all due respect, Hammond laughed. They do. The girls have to prove it.
Owen paused a moment as this sank in, and he leaned forward, placing a hand on the desk so he could get closer. Hold on a minute. Sir, you're saying we need to put the Raptor girls on court? Put them on the stand? I asked.
I think we'd only need to use two. Blue would be one, of course. Obviously, she's the beta. She answers directly from you, so we need to ensure she's capable of her own autonomy. And then we could pick any of the others would be fine. Anything to prove that they are too and thinking and feeling for themselves. So where are the girls?
I left them in a safe location for the time being. I'll head there after our meeting and bring Blue and another with me. They'll prove everything, Owen muttered. But God, who do I choose?
2 more laps, girls. Almost done, Blue called. Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Echo, Delta, and Charlie all sounded off as they ran yet another lap around the large lake. Owen had dropped them off at the camp they'd accidentally barged into on a few days ago. The counselors had agreed to let them stay in one of the cabins while Owen tried to work things out legally. Blue had laid out for them the severity of their situation. The very knowledge that they could be back in the facility scared even Delta into silence. She too prayed that Owen could work this all out. After they rounded the lake again, Delta pulled up along Blue and smirked. Better not fall behind, Beta. Better not step on my feet. You're getting cocky, Blue smirked back, picking up the pace. Delta laughed and pulled ahead, only for Blue to move faster to catch up. Blue blinked in shock as Delta got even quicker in her sprint. When had Delta gotten so much faster? It alarmed her how much her sisters were growing up without even realizing it. Blue pushed herself harder to catch up, lapping the lake again incredibly fast. Echo and Charlie struggled to surge after the two competitors. Hey guys, slow down! I can't keep... Ow! Charlie let out a squeal as she hit the grass. It caved underneath her and she fell in the mud, slipping, falling into the lake with a loud splash. Blue and Echo both stopped and ran to back her up. Charlie! Echo cried. Are you okay? Echo held out her hand as Charlie shook her head hard, her pigtail swinging in all directions, throwing dirty water around. Darn, I'm all filthy now. You were already filthy. We'd sweated up a storm while running, Delta pointed out. Yeah, but now I'm muddy too, Charlie groaned. Echo grabbed her hand and yanked her out of the water to help clean off her pants and legs. Well, get a shower and you'll be as good as new after that. Come on, girls. Might as well call it there for now. Hey, Blue, why not finish our race first? I was just about to beat you, Delta called back. Maybe later, Delta. Right now I think we need to rest up, Blue answered, sighing. Delta snorted in response, but followed after her all the same. Think the mess hall has anything good to eat? Echo asked, trying to change the subject. They always do, Charlie giggled. They have really tasty food at this camp. Yeah, but you eat too much, Charlie, Blue noted. We're guests here. We shouldn't be mooching off the camp staff like this. Are you kidding? Delta laughed. They seemed happy to have us. Well, either way, we should be polite, Blue argued. Blue, Echo spoke up. When did Alpha say he would return? Tomorrow, hopefully. He'll call the camp director if anything changes, Blue answered. I still don't really get it, Charlie muttered as they walked to the shower hut. The far hut in the middle of the camp area where the campers could take showers. Since this week there were no campers and only counselors, they had the showers to themselves. What don't you get? Echo asked. I mean, we didn't do anything wrong. Alpha himself said so. We were defending ourselves, Charlie argued. Why should we get in trouble for that? Well, it's not just us who are getting in trouble, Blue explained. Since Alpha's our handler, well, he'll be held responsible. The human court needs to decide if what we did was wrong or not. I think there's more to it than that, Echo answered. I'm not sure, but I think if it were a group of humans who had killed those men, it'd be a different story altogether. I think part of this has to do with the fact that we're raptors. Oh, so we're now being persecuted just for being raptors, Delta growled. Just great. Calm down, all of you. Alpha won't let anything bad happen to us, Blue snapped. Now to the showers, then we go for some lunch. The girls quickly stripped down and ran to the showers with Blue right behind them. Though her words of encouragement seemed to relax Charlie a little, they did little to ease her own mind. As she stood under the pouring water, her heart felt heavy. What on earth would happen to them if Alpha couldn't succeed? Would they really have to go back to that place? No, it won't happen. I won't let it happen, she said. Blue stopped as she heard her cell phone ringing in her bag just outside the shower room. Running out of the shower, she threw a towel around her and dug into her bag with a soaked hand until she found her phone. Lifting it to her ear, she smiled, realizing it was Alpha. Alpha, are you okay? I'm fine, Blue. How are the others? They're all right. We're staying active and trying to be productive while we're here. I'm glad to hear it. Listen, in order to win this thing, I'm going to need your help, Owen muttered darkly. Whatever you need, we'll do it, Blue answered firmly. Yeah, but it won't be easy, Blue. I need two of you girls to show up in court and testify. Blue paused a moment and blinked in surprise. Testify? We have to appear as witnesses? It's kind of complicated to explain, but the Navy needs proof that you and the girls are sentient and more than just animals. The only way to prove it is for you to show them. I'm going to need to borrow you and one of the other girls to do this. Well, it's strange, but I'll do it. I knew you would, Blue, but here's the hard part. Which of the other girls should testify? Each one spells trouble, Owen growled. Blue blinked, thinking it over in her mind, and then began to bite her lip nervously. Oh, God. Who should come with us? Whoever we pick is going to be asked to take the stand and maybe ask some very difficult questions. I'm leaving it up to you, Blue. You need to decide which of the girls we bring to court. And that was Chapter 8. How did you guys like that one? Did y'all enjoy it? Hope y'all liked that one. I had fun reading it. Let me check messages. All right. Well, I think that's going to be where we call it because I've got to meet up with Lark pretty soon, so probably don't have time to read the next chapter, but I'm glad that y'all enjoyed it. Next time we do this, which will hopefully be next Monday, we'll probably finish up New Epoch until I write more chapters for it, and then we can focus on another story and continue Monster Club and continue Raptor Girls. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Oh, what was it? Wait, so what was the time gap from when this chapter and last chapter was written? Oh, I didn't specify that, but we'll talk more about it later. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, the Monster Club story is a very old story of mine. I wrote it back when I wasn't a great writer or back when I was still kind of new to all this. So forgive me for it not being very great. And the Raptor Girl story I haven't touched in a few years, so I need to get back to it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really did have a good time. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. I will... Actually, tomorrow's Wednesday, so Lark will be doing his stream if he's up for it. And he's continuing his Mordor stream, as far as I can tell. So I hope you guys are excited for that. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you to Aaron and to Havoc for dropping in when they did. I hope that y'all enjoyed it. Sorry Daniel couldn't come, but, you know, it's one of those things. And as always, guys, I will see you in my next video. Take care.